Okay, members, and good afternoon, and welcome to this afternoon's meeting of the Education Committee. So, housekeeping, just to start with, I would advise members that the committee meeting will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online. And I would advise anybody in the public gallery that they're welcome to use mobile devices as long as they're in airplane mode and all devices are muted, and it's not permitted to take photographs or record any part of the meeting. Okay, so item 1 on the agenda is apologies. I haven't received any. Just a note from Cara that she's attending remotely. Apart from that, any other members aware of any apologies? No. Okay, so that takes us to item 2 on the agenda, and that's Chairperson's business. So just very briefly, I would refer members to a transcript of the committee's informal briefing with the Schoolwear Association on the School Uniforms Guidelines and Allowances Bill on Tuesday the 17th of June 2025, and that's at page 5. So it's just very briefly to seek members' agreement that that's included in the papers for the School Uniforms Bill. Is that agreed? Agreed. Item 3 is declaration of interests. Do any members have any declarations they want to make in relation to any items on the agenda today? No. As usual, if that should arise in the meeting, do just indicate. And then item 4 on the agenda is matters arising. So at page 15 in your packs, there's correspondence from the Assembly and Executive Review Committee, and that is seeking information in relation to that committee's review of Assembly Committee engagement on cross-cutting executive strategies. So the committee had considered this at its meeting on the 4th of June and agreed to return to the matter for more detailed consideration. Appreciate meeting agenda has been fairly packed, and members have a lot on their plates at this stage in this Assembly session. But are there any views that members have, particularly around our concurrent work? Now, there's not a massive clock ticking on this. I think we've got a wee bit of time, even after recess, to put something together on this.
I mean, clerks have been discussing the various ways to achieve this kind of work anyway, and we'll feed in from their perspectives. But this committee has used the concurrent committee mechanism and some, cross-cutting correspondence as well, to address cross-cutting themes. So I just wondered, did members have anything they wanted to register about that experience? When you went off to Middletown with Health Committee, when you met with the Economy Committee on 2 occasions. If you have any feedback on that.
I mean, I'm certainly happy to put in there. I mean, I think there is definite merit and benefit to the concurrent work. I think the issue is really tracking outcomes from it after you've had the meeting is one of the challenges, is just in terms of ensuring that when the matters are cross-cutting, you tend to get back into your sort of tunnel vision of just what falls under the statutory remit of your committee. So I think possibly better ways to track the outcomes from concurrent evidence sessions would be helpful. But I do think trying to be proactive, as we have done, with perhaps a clear output, a motion which gets some of the issues onto the agenda for the wider assembly is something worth considering. But other than that, happy to open up to members if they have any views on that. No. Got eyes fixed on devices in front of me here, so I'm assuming that's no further feedback. Well, look, if there is anything else, I assume that you'll be bringing something to members in the next, maybe after recess at some stage, maybe with some draft views on that. But if there's anything else any members want to feed in, please do so. Okay, so that takes us on to item 5, and that's draft minutes. I would refer members to the draft minutes of the Education Committee meetings of the 17th and 18th of June, and those are at pages 21 and 24 of your packs. Can I seek members' agreement that the minutes are a complete and accurate record of proceedings? Mm-hmm. So that's agreed. Okay. That's great, thanks. Okay, thanks very much. Okay. So that takes us to item 6, and that is our first evidence session of today's meeting, and that is an oral briefing from the Youth Assembly. So this is a meeting that we've had, a briefing we've had on the agenda for quite some time, so we're looking forward to hearing from the Youth Assembly, and they will specifically be reporting on their report into learning for life and work. So I would refer members to the clerk's cover note to page 33, just while the witnesses get seated there. And then we also have the report itself, the Youth Assembly Education Committee report on learning for life and work. That's at page 35. And then some questions which have been suggested for members at page 88. So So I'll just let everyone get seated. I think there's maybe some more members of the Youth Assembly going into the public gallery as well. So we'll have a full house today. So before we open up the evidence session, I'll just make a note of the members of the Assembly that I have down who will be presenting evidence today, but you're all welcome to do your own introductions when you start as well. We have Harrison Kerr, member of the Youth Assembly, Daniel McGuckin, these are all members of the Youth Assembly, Lucy Wong, Willow Sackno, hope I've pronounced that correctly, and Veronica McNulty. So you're all very welcome here today, and it's good to have you at Education Committee. So we're always really pleased to hear from the Youth Assembly, and it's a really important part of our work to maintain that engagement with yourselves. And this issue of learning for life and work is definitely a really important one. We heard from Lucy Crane, who carried out the review of the curriculum at a recent meeting, and issues around learning for life and work actually featured quite heavily in the evidence that she provided, so that may be something that you do want to pick up in your evidence. But you are all very welcome here today, so I will open up now for you to make any initial presentation that you want to make. I'm not sure if one person's leading or if you'll all contribute a bit to that, but if we could sort of aim to keep that for up to 10 minutes, and then we'll move into question and answer. So it's over to yourselves.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Harrison. Shortly I'm going to be giving out some colouring sheets, and if you'd like to just sit there, and you can do that, or you can get along with your work. That's all we need to do today. It's not really a serious period.
Okay. Actually sounds quite appealing.
Thanks, please.
You're keeping your crayons?
No.
Harrison, I didn't get a crayon. When do the crayons come?
I don't want to be here. You don't want to be here. Let's just get this over and done with. Now, obviously,
See you later.
we don't want to make light of why we are here, but that phrase, or something similar, is something we, as pupils, have experienced from our LLW teachers in our lessons. How would you feel if that's how your committee chair began your meetings? It would hardly inspire or motivate you. It's hardly surprising then that the LLW brand is so damaged, as Lucy Crehan pointed out to the committee last week. We are grateful for the opportunity to speak to you today to share the work we've done over the past year and a half, and most importantly, to share with you what we believe needs to change to make education in Northern Ireland fit for the 21st century. We were delighted to meet with the Education Minister earlier this year to discuss the School Uniform Bill. Unfortunately, in this case, the Minister was unable to meet with us to hear our recommendations and those of the other two Youth Assembly committees who have worked on young women's rights in schools and mental health in schools. We will, of course, share our reports and recommendations with him and look forward to engaging with him in the future. Let me move you on to give some background to our work. In January 2024, we launched our Big Youth Survey, reaching nearly 1,800 young people aged 11 to 21 across Northern Ireland. Education emerged as a top concern. At our February plenary, we voted on the top 10 issues raised and formed 3 committees: Education, Health and Rights and Equality. We then had a planning day in May where we asked a key question: is our curriculum preparing us for real life? The answer was clear: no. That's why we chose to focus on the Learning for Life and Work curriculum as our committee project. LLW is meant to teach vital life skills, money management, rights, mental health and work and relationships, but often it falls short in our schools. We consulted widely on this issue with the department, Queen's University, teachers, researchers and youth groups like the Secondary Students' Union. Their input helped us identify key gaps and ways to improve LLW and youth involvement. Finally, I'd just like to briefly mention our Stakeholder Day in August 2024. We met with SIA, the department and Assembly researchers. A couple of things there surprised us. Apparently, it's our responsibility to ensure we are taught the statutory LLW curriculum and go to our Board of Governors if it's not being correctly delivered. Would you have done this as a teenager? One member said he had not been taught some aspects of LLW, and the department responded that he probably had, and it can be taught through other subjects, so he might not have realised. We found this to be quite patronising. In fact, Many members' own experiences of timetabled LLW lessons can also serve as a disappointing example of teachers' attitudes to LLW. Some teachers just randomly click on a PowerPoint and decide, right, today we're going to be doing this. This shows just how inconsistent LLW education is for some pupils.
My name's Lucy. Earlier this year, we launched a survey through Citizen Space, asking pupils aged 11 to 18 about their experiences of LLW at Key Stage 3 and 4. The response was incredible. 1,467 young people spoke up, and what they told us was striking. First, the positives. Nearly 77% said LLW lessons are age appropriate, 58% found the content up to date, and over 70% felt teachers handled sensitive topics like racism and relationships well. But key concerns remain. 73% felt their LLW education was inadequate. 64% weren't taught about their rights. 77% haven't even heard of RSE, relationships and sexuality education. Only 38% of LLW is valued in school, and just 46% enjoy it. Alarmingly, 60% don't see it as equal to core subjects, and 58% couldn't choose to study it if given the choice. Pupil voice is lacking. Nearly half felt they had no say in how LLW is taught, while 67% said teachers are well trained. Just 49% felt those teachers enjoyed delivering the subject. So we're calling for a relevant modern LLW curriculum, greater pupil involvement in shaping content, consistent, engaging delivery by well-supported teachers, and clear recognition that LLW is essential in preparing you for life.
My name is Willow, and I want to briefly highlight the Key Stage 3 section of the survey. We asked students which LLW topics they've been taught, and the results were mixed. While human rights and personal health were widely covered, areas like participation and employability were less consistent. Only 39% recalled learning about democracy, and fewer than half remembered career management or entrepreneurship lessons, despite all being statutory topics. This raises a key question. Are these topics being skipped, or were those lessons forgettable? We also looked at how LLW is delivered. Though most students had regular classes and teachers, many described the lessons as dull, often reduced to booklets and notes. Some said they quote, did basically nothing or used the time for other subjects. But when asked what they want, students were clear: real life skills. They want to know how to manage money, understand taxes, handle emergencies, and talk honestly about relationships, mental health, and jobs. They called for engaging methods, debates, guest speakers, field trips, and trained, passionate teachers who can handle sensitive issues. The message is clear: young people need and want LLW, but it must be consistent, relevant, and engaging, because preparing students for life beyond school isn't optional, it's essential.
My name is Veronica. In our survey of 600 Key Stage 4 pupils, fewer than 30% said they'd been taught key LLW topics. Some didn't even realise LLW was a subject, while others dropped it to focus on GCSEs because schools didn't take it seriously. One student said, living and managing as an independent young adult, travelling, budgeting, childcare, job applications. We don't learn any of this. Many others felt the same. Students across Northern Ireland are asking for LLW to be practical, relevant and engaging, covering real-life issues like money, housing, mental health, relationships, politics and career paths. We want to leave school prepared, not panicked for adulthood. The Youth Assembly heard these concerns and is making 6 clear recommendations. Here are the first 3. 1. Make LLW practical and useful. Too often, LLW talks about life without preparing pupils for it. The content must be hands-on and focused on real skills. What pupils want to learn: money, budgeting, saving, banking, credit, loans, avoiding debt. Housing, renting, contracts, bills, tenant rights. Work and taxes, payslips, taxing, filing, workplace expectations. Emergencies, first aid, legal rights, crisis response. Key message: LLW should be a toolkit for adulthood, not a list of definitions. 2. Modernise and expand the curriculum. Pupils say the LLW curriculum feels outdated and disconnected from real life. What should be added? Real social issues, not generic citizenship content. Media literacy, fake news, algorithms, critical thinking. Topics like misogyny, sexism, and gender-based harm. Mental health, stress, grief, trauma, emotional well-being. Updated sex and relationships education, consent, identity, boundaries, digital safety. Key message, pupils want LLW to reflect their lived experience, not outdated ideas. 3. Train and support LLW teachers. It's not just what's taught, it's who teaches it and how. Pupils say LLW is often delivered by untrained or unmotivated teachers. What needs to change? LLW should be taught by trained, confident, passionate staff. Avoid assigning it as a timetable filler, because students notice when this happens. Fund regular training on fast-changing topics like social media, mental health, and politics. Teachers last received LLW training in 2007 when the revised curriculum was introduced. That's before most of us were born. Support whole school approaches to well-being and personal development. Let teachers share good practice regularly. Key message, pupils engage when teachers care and tune out when they don't.
My name is Daniel McGuckin, and I will talk about the final 3 recommendations. Number 4, make learning interactive and engaging. Many pupils find LLW boring and passive. Worksheets and copying notes are not enough. To improve, use real-life examples, case studies, and open discussions. Bring in guest speakers from charities, youth work, or lived experience. Try debates, role plays, workshops, and group projects. Let pupils explore topics they care about and help shape lessons. Key message is LLW should be about real conversations and skill building, not PowerPoint slides. Number 5 is treat LLW with the respect it deserves. Pupils want LLW to be taken seriously, not sidelined, cancelled, or not taught at all. How to show it matters. Protect LLW time in the timetable. Don't replace it with cover or admin. Consider recognition through projects or portfolios, not exams. Deliver consistently across all schools. Key message, if schools don't value LLW, pupils won't either. 6. Make space for youth voice in curriculum design. Students must be involved in shaping the curriculum. It makes learning more relevant, inclusive, and engaging. Key message is listening to students leads to a curriculum that works better for everyone. Now, from a final word from young people. Across Northern Ireland, pupils are asking for the same thing. Make LLW a subject that actually helps us with life. Not more stress, but lessons that prepare us emotionally, practically, and socially. Let's get LLW right. Finally, we'd like to ask the committee to consider 3 questions. 1. Given our report and the evidence to Lisa Crane gave to the committee last week when she stated the brand is beyond repair. Does the committee feel that action needs to be taken? What would that look like? Number 2, will you support our recommendations by raising them with the Education Minister? Number 3, how can we ensure the recommendations are heard? What is your advice on the next steps? I just would like to make one final comment. My LLW teacher has taught me the subject really well, and I just want to say that it's a real example how the LLW should be taught, because she used not just talks and slides, but she used open discussions, and it's a real example how it should be used.
Thank you, Daniel, and all the presenters there, and good to hear. There's good practice out there, and we hear that a lot, that sometimes there is a lot of negativity around LLW, but when you get a teacher who gets it right, it can be really impactful, so that is really good to hear. I'd just like to open again just with a thank you for all of your engagement with the committee on this issue and across the range of issues that you've engaged with us on. It really does add to our work, and just the RSE inquiry, school uniform bill. There's been a range of issues where your input has been really helpful and appreciated. I want to start. You talked a lot about how there seem to be a lot of gaps in the LLW provision, and that you don't get the material that you need. From your own perspectives as young people engaging with that curriculum, what topics do you think are most urgently missing from LLW from your own experience?
Okay, so I think if I can, one of the things about the inconsistency of LW education is that items like financial education, first aid and crisis training, media literacy, and information about local politics are omitted from the curriculum because they're not seen as priorities, when in fact they are essential life skills. And even if our students don't realise they're not being taught it at the time, they will feel the impact of that later in life when they leave school maybe, and they're wondering, was I supposed to be taught how to know this?
What we also found in the survey is that topics young people said they hadn't been taught were and they thought were missing from the curriculum was part of the statutory curriculum, but for whatever reason it's being missed in their education. So we also found that was an issue.
Do you think there's maybe an issue with teachers not feeling equipped to deliver that? Something that you referenced in your presentation. Do you think, you've made some recommendation around training and supporting teachers? Has that been your experience, that maybe teachers shy away from some of the topics or don't know how to deliver them effectively?
Yeah, well, I've heard from other schools sometimes the LLW teachers are maybe teaching other subjects like maybe English and PE, and they just don't take it as seriously as the other subjects because it's just like a fill in the timetable. It's just it's just something like the school board gives them, and they're just like, okay, I'll just do this as well. So it doesn't get taken seriously.
You've referenced Lucy Crane's evidence to committee, and I think your report is very timely in that regard, as she brought forward some really clear recommendations, and I think a lot of what you're saying is really chiming with what Lucy shared at the committee evidence session. One of the things that she had said was that because LLW isn't valued, it doesn't tend to be delivered particularly well in some schools. And she actually proposed that whatever the new qualification might look like or where it would sit in the curriculum, that there's maybe an argument for a qualification of some sort done through project-based learning and working together, not a pressured exam scenario. Do you think there's any merit to that if there was a qualification at the end, that there would be more value placed on it?
Yeah, I think it would be. I think it would give people the incentive to listen and learn in LW, and it would give teachers the incentive to teach it and to want a good outcome and not just, another gap in the timetable to fill.
And I also think that if there's a qualification given at the end, in a lot of schools, LLW, at Key Stage 3, from my experience, we never had a formal exam at the end of the school year for LLW. And I feel because there was no exam, people just kind of didn't respect it. So if there's a qualification, they have an end goal to work towards, so I think it would bring merit.
That's great. One other question for me, and then I'll open up to members. If no doubt, actually, the committee will be very happy to share your recommendations and seek a really clear update from the Minister on how he would plan to address those, but also with the curriculum review recommendations around LLW. If there is going to be change in this space, how do you think the department can engage with you and other young people more effectively so that the design of any new curriculum would actually reflect the things that you're saying that you need?
One point we thought of is taking young people's views at the earliest stage, because it's the young people who are being affected, who are being taught, and even working with local schools and school councils would really help, because what young people are experiencing, we want it to reflect their lived experiences and not lived experiences of young people even just 10 years ago, with the amount of change that's happened.
I would want to mention as well, there are, like we've said, there are examples of good practice out there. We engaged with teachers from Strangford College about how they delivered LW, and there were several points they raised about bringing in sixth form pupils to share their lived experience, having feedback at the end of each module, and interactive portfolios and projects. I would say using them as a model for the new LW curriculum review would be excellent, because what they've got out there is really close to what we want to get from LW.
That's all really helpful. I think it's a subject unlike any other. It is deliberately intended to prepare young people for life beyond school. And I think if we're not listening to what you think about it and whether it actually serves its purpose, then we have to question what the point of the whole exercise is. So that's all really helpful. I'll open up to other members now. Deputy Chair, if you want.
Thanks, Chair. And thanks to all of you for coming in today. I suppose you've already partly answered some of the question that I'm going to ask, and that is, if change is to happen, what should it look like?
I think one of our main concerns was that it needs to be fit for the 21st century. I mean, the fact that we're using, one of the members mentioned using textbooks made in 2007, which is older than any of us young people sitting here. I mean, times have changed with social media especially. Definitely a lot more education on online safety especially would be really good.
And whatever changes made should be flexible. Things like social media, digital safety, they are changing sometimes every day, and teachers should have that flexibility to be able to adapt current and real world issues into their LW lessons to enable group discussion rather than just talking about more generic things, because that would also keep pupils engaged as well if it's actually real issues out there that they're talking about.
And what about issues such as relationships, misogyny, consent, things like that? Should that be part of LLW, or should that be kept separate in RSE?
Well, I think it should be a part of it. I do LLW for GCSE, and when we were going over the course, we briefly covered it, but we didn't go in depth with it. And I think that people need to learn about it more so they know what they're doing when that situation arises.
That's all I have.
For you, Deputy Chair. I think Cara online had asked to come in.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you so much to all of you for being here today and such a strong, memorable opening. For me, I was in school when LLW was a thing, and I had the exact same experience as yourselves, and that was well over a decade ago. So I'm even really resonating with what you're talking about. And I recall last year I had gone to Queen's when SSUNI launched their research on LLW, and it blew my mind really just about this is a part of your diary that can be so well used to inform you on things like financial education. Pat just alluded there to the importance of RSE, and I would be a passionate advocate, of course, that mental health is talked about and reducing stigma during LLW as well. I just have one question, and it's about global citizenship education. We've seen recently a rise in tensions and riots with newcomers in our community. Do you think LLW would be a strong place? I know you had talked about bringing NGOs in, some charities in, maybe people with lived experience. Do you think that LLW could play a role in tackling racism in Northern Ireland and educating pupils?
Definitely, I think a large cause of racism is lack of education, and the fact that we have, that gap in a timetable to fill. I mean, there's no better time, I think, than teaching young people so early on to be accepting, to learn about other cultures and to understand them. I think that's definitely something that should be put in place.
And if LLW is made engaging, then pupils will want to listen and they will want to learn and hopefully replicate that experience in their real life. So yes, I see a real potential for LLW to impact racism and other issues within Northern Ireland.
And I think also I was chatting with a lady who was doing research on the UN rights of the child and educating our young people on their rights. I really think LLW can play a role around the democracy aspect, understanding the power of your vote, things like that as well. And just around financial education with things like credit scores, how taxes work, all those kinds of things. And I think you've just provided us a really strong briefing today about how impactful learning for life and work can actually be. And it's crazy that I'm speaking as someone who's 29, and I know in my experience it really was such a weak subject with a lot of potential. So thank you so much for articulating here today your perspectives, and we're definitely listening, and it's one to take back to the department. Thank you.
Cara Donna, you'd indicated next.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for this, because I've been sitting doodling away, and when I was in school, I used to get in trouble for it, drawing on a desk and then having to clean them. So thank you. See, at the right at the start of your presentation, I picked up, you says that the Minister hadn't engaged with you. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. We invited him to events and he just, maybe he was busy or just didn't want to go and he just didn't show up.
Disappointing. We're all going to be busy, but important work being done, and you're in the front face of it. And it's like the RSE, we had that mini inquiry, and it's so important to hear young people's voices in it and what is they're learning, because we do hear a lot of it. Oh, you may be learning it as you're going along, but see, if you don't know you're learning something, it's, in my eyes, it's completely pointless. See, as far as like well-being and mental health, I know a lot of the work I do with the youth club, they'll say it's still the number one issue for young people is the lack of support when it comes to mental health. Can you just give me a wee view on that, where you feel that's sitting there, and is that being incorporated in any of your education, and particularly around LLW?
I particularly think that pastoral care and other aspects of school support should be an important part of the LLW curriculum to inform students that help is out there if they need it. Because yes, you may see a poster on the wall, but unless you can put a face to the name and maybe there's a designated teacher or someone who's out there who you can come to if you need help, then that would really help them to be a bit more receptive to it, rather than if it's just this unknown entity or person behind the door, then you would naturally be a lot more apprehensive about just going in and telling them about your problems, if you know what I mean.
And a lot of the research would show that most young people, by the time they hit 14, I think it's something like 50% are already struggling with anxiety and mental health, which has been exacerbated by COVID, and yet we know early intervention would be key if we would invest in that. But sadly doesn't happen, and that's why it's important that those in power do listen to this. I suppose you touched on it with the pastoral care. Do you feel that our schools are generally good with pastoral care? Because I do have a concern in the direction where the Minister's actually going at the minute, that we're going to move even further away from pastoral care and more emphasis being put on testing.
I think unfortunately it does differ from school to school. Yeah. Like, I think from my own experience, I've had good experience, but you hear stories from other people in different schools, and it's just a case by case basis. I think it really does need to be pulled up on though, and definitely.
It's something that you would support, have more of that sort of direction, that pastoral care, more well-being. Just one last thing. It was just, I got a real eye-opener this year, and I've made this point a few times even in the chamber when I watched the show Adolescence, and the online. That scared me a lot as a parent, because I thought I had a handle on it, and I really didn't. And the challenges that you are facing. Is there any support at the minute that you are getting within the school around online safety, around the likes of the Andrew Tates of the world, and that TikTok videos, and that toxic masculinity, and that then ends up being violence against women and girls? Really, that's building towards that.
Yeah, well, we have been talked about online safety. We've been told like the usual stuff, like don't put stuff online you'll regret, and like how even if you delete it, people can still view it, and I just think it needs to be covered more, because we only covered it once or twice. I think it needs to be covered maybe at least once a month, because people need to realise how impactful it could be on someone's life, and how much it is a serious issue.
Yeah, and I suppose that would be the view I would have thought of it. It's don't share images, and watch who you're talking to, and all that there, and that trolling side of it. But it was more that the growth of that incel culture, and didn't even know what a kidney bean, what it meant as an emoji, and that understanding and all as well. That was a big eye opener to me. So I suppose that changes all the time with young people, what things mean. So you really do need that support in an ever changing world.
I think it is very difficult as well when you've got teachers from a fully other different generation, and social media and the online world just changes so quickly. It's very hard for teachers to be provided with the training and the resources to catch up, but I think it definitely needs to be put in place.
Yeah, because it simply wouldn't, because I get almost feel the arguments if it was in a chamber debating this here, it'd be like, we'll just ban mobile phones, but like school follows you. It doesn't matter where you have a phone in school, you know, it follows you into the bedroom or into the house because the phone's always there and people have then access to this. No, thank you very much. Thank you.
Danny, Peter, you'd indicated.
Thank you very much, Chair. And look, can I first of all say I've been really impressed with your presentation and your ability to answer questions. It's a tough space being up there, and you've all done really, really well. So thanks for coming in and sharing that today. I want to ask a wee bit just around your survey information. So I know LLW gets a little bit of a bad press, and as other members have said, Lucy tends to agree. I had a wee look at your survey results, and some of the results, a majority of people in your survey said that they enjoyed LLW. The majority felt, nearly double said that they felt safe on controversial issues. So that's kind of the how it's taught aspect. And I'll get to the question in a second. On the age appropriate stuff, 77% said of results said that they actually, 77 to 4 said that they thought it was age appropriate, and 58% to 14 said that the content was up to date. And I suppose my question is, do you think, because those are quite positive results for LLW in broad brush terms, nearly double figures in terms of that difference in the numbers, do you think it's a case that some schools are doing it really well and some schools aren't? Explain those results, if that's a question for you.
Yeah, I think there are some schools who are doing it really well. I mean, we were able to speak with teachers from Strangford College, and the work that they were doing was incredibly positive. But the fact that there still is that percentage of people who didn't find it age appropriate, who didn't find it, enjoyable, for example, that is something that should still be worried about.
I would direct you to the comments there as well. When people do choose to speak out about LLW, you can see the things they're saying are a waste of time, not useful, no point of it. We just sit there for half the lesson doing like absolutely nothing. It's the comments that really stand out, those pupils' experiences, even if they are limited. It's not acceptable, and it should absolutely be made sure that consistency of LLW education is important.
And I also wanted to say about the percentage of people who enjoy LLW. I feel like some of those people, maybe they do enjoy what they're being taught because their teachers care, but maybe they enjoy LLW for the wrong reason, the fact that it's a free period, they can just talk to their friends. I don't feel that many teenagers and young people are going to stand up to their teacher and say, I want to do this in front of all of their class.
Yep. Okay. I'd be worried if you put maths up here, how many people enjoy maths. I'm not sure what the survey results will be like for that one. So in terms of a change in the curriculum, so Lucy Crane obviously said actually it's pretty bad and it needs a complete sort of revamp. Again, in your survey, the responses, the majority still said actually the curriculum shouldn't be changed in terms of your survey responses. Do you think that's maybe just the people who answered your survey or a particular subsection of people or whatever? Because actually, because LLW seemed to be quite the case that a majority of people said it shouldn't be changed. Or should there just be specific aspects should be changed, you think? Are there bits that definitely should go in and definitely should go out? What about that for a question?
I would say, yes, I understand there are some aspects of it that are being taught more than others. And in terms of our survey, as you can see, it's mostly grammar students who completed the survey. So obviously there could be different perspectives from secondary schools. I know some of our youth assembly members from secondary schools have had different experiences, but that happens in grammar schools as well, with an academic focus on things that LW is sometimes tossed to the side. I would say it's, if you get a good, like's been said, it's been said, if you get a good teacher who's dedicated to the subject, they will take you through what is, by on the whole, an okay curriculum at the moment. Yes, there are some improvements that should be made to it, but as it is, it's just a problem that it's not being delivered in some aspects, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. I just wanted to pick up, just the other thing was, I was really impressed in your recommendations. You picked up on, I think the term was using fake news and algorithms in terms of social media, and I think that's really important. Certainly, I think some of the recommendations you made were really, really interesting and very, very insightful. And certainly I'm going to take it away and have another look at it. So, look, thank you very much for your time, and thanks for answering my questions.
Thank you, Peter. Michelle, you'd indicated.
Thank you, and thank you all for your evidence today. Excellent as always. I wanted to start actually with, when you started your contribution there, you reminded me of my local youth MP, Robin Ballantyne, has been doing a piece of work. So she's interested in standardised political literacy in schools. So I just wanted to get your take on that based on the information provided. She did a survey herself of constituents, and one of the statistics you might be interested in is 86.7% of those who completed the survey said they felt that schools should have a mandatory political education scheme. Is that something you think would be helpful?
I think definitely. Recently we had a debate on if votes should be lowered to 16, and many of the young people who were opposed to it, their main reason was lack of education. The average 16-year-old wouldn't have the awareness of, even what parties exist in Northern Ireland. So I do definitely think that should be incorporated into LW.
Yes, I might have to connect you guys together to see if you can help advocate or support each other. The other thing that struck me when you were speaking was, and there's some self-interest here, you mentioned obviously the issue of online safety. So I've worked recently with the NSPCC and colleagues here in the Education Committee to set up what's called an all-party group on online safety for children and young people. So what do you think should be our priorities? And I hope you'll be getting an invitation soon to engage with that group as well. It'd be great to have your insights. Was there anything immediately you think we should direct our focus to?
I think definitely, as we mentioned in our recommendations, would be fake news and just media literacy and understanding that what you see online it's probably not real, and definitely safety, with the use of social media especially.
Mm-hmm.
I would say another problem is these days, I'm sure maybe some of you have heard of it, but the problem with AI generated content, things can seem really so realistic, photos, even videos, when in fact they aren't at all true. So it is important to educate young people on that and get them to be cautious and aware from a young age. Otherwise, if they see the wrong things, then they could make the wrong assumptions, and that could be quite damaging, if you know what I mean.
One last thing was just in terms of the change that you want to see, do you feel confident in the powers that be right now that this type of change will happen?
Hopefully, with the evidence given by Lucy Crane and the work being done even just within local schools, we've seen some schools who've had really good examples of how LLW can be implemented, that I think we are quite hopeful that changes can be made.
Well, it's pretty compelling what Lucy has found and what you guys are then kind of corroborating. And look, you asked us 3 questions and none of us have even touched on them, so we'll probably deal with them at the end ourselves. But in terms of the LLW brand, you make a compelling case for that being something that needs an urgent refresh to build credibility and excitement in that topic again. I think we'll definitely raise it with the Minister. And advice on next steps, I guess, you're doing everything right. You've done your research, you've provided evidence, you've come and spoken to us, and I said you're leveraging this committee as well to try and help you, so I think you know what you're doing. But thank you very much for today, I appreciate it very much.
Cheryl, you'd indicated next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to you all. It's a fantastic piece of work, and it is something that is so important that you've brought to the table. So I had obviously worked with yourselves on the skills gap and the PAC, and it was again a fantastic piece of information for us. So I just want to touch on that careers piece. So it says less than 50% of students are actually getting that information within the LLW sessions. So just in terms of careers, how do you feel that aspect of the curriculum within LLW can be improved, or how important do you think the focus is on that at the moment?
I would say careers is one of the more out there aspects of LLW. It is quite well heard of, and there are, for teachers and schools that seek it, there are excellent careers resources available, and especially careers talks, having people come in and talk about their career or whatever, especially if they're past pupils as well, is an important part of it. And it's these things that get pupils interested in LLW and careers specifically, because you're not just being talked to, it's a discussion back and forth, and you get to kind of plan out, what would this look like if I went into this career? And in terms of career support, I would say in my school, career support is very good. Yes, there are lots of resources and lots of support available, but again, like we've been saying, it's so varied. Some people are just missing out, and we don't want their voices to go unheard.
And I think that's what we're seeing here, that there is some fantastic, methods of best practice that are being used. And from that, I know that Daniel, you had kind of relayed some of the examples, but is there any other things that you have seen through your studies, even through your own experiences, that you think are actually, in terms of best practice, that could be replicated elsewhere in Northern Ireland?
I mean, I found in my own school for careers, we use online platforms, which, because sometimes when you've got a teacher who their main role isn't being a careers teacher but is teaching a subject, it can be difficult for them to understand other careers. So when you've got an online platform, I mean, your options are endless. I think as well, in my own schooling, we've had guest speakers come in, like what Harrison said, and again, having a real life person sitting in front of you and telling you about a career is a lot more engaging than just reading off a PowerPoint.
No, I appreciate that. And just even within your piece of work, and you noted there just about the 70%, obviously feedback has been from grammar schools. Do you have any more information that breaks that down more specifically, just in terms of people's, the experience maybe people have felt within the grammar school or the secondary sector or the Irish medium sector? Is that broken down more specific, or was that able to be done?
I don't believe so, but we have found that I believe the Youth Assembly itself has a percentage that reflects that as well, just with however way numbers have worked. So I think with members sending it to their friends, that's just how it has panned out. But we have found that LLW has been not as respected in both secondary and grammar schools. We found especially that in grammar schools, LLW was used as a revision period, probably due to the competitive academic pressure put on students.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
So Kathy, you'd indicated.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks very much for coming in. It's been really, really informative. I can honestly say I don't disagree with anything that you've said in other discussions that I've had with young people. I think, Daniel, like you said, one of the key things is that it's so different across different schools. I know in my daughter's school that, she has fantastic lessons, and they have a lot of people who come in and speak to them as well. Unlike Cara, when I was at school, there was no such thing as LLW. What we did have was people coming in and maybe speaking to us, but it was very scattered kind of approach, and there didn't seem to be anything uniform in it, and maybe some classes were getting it and others weren't, which was putting some at a disadvantage. What I wanted to ask you is, in an ideal world, do you think it would be best if there was one person or one teacher in the school who just solely concentrated on this, that this was the only thing that they did, or maybe pastoral care or well-being or something was the only thing that they had to worry about? Or do you think it would be better that every teacher maybe had, or was not forced, but had to teach some aspect of LLW? I'm just thinking, we've heard that there might be some topics within it that can be awkward to discuss and talk about in your peers. Do you think you would trust more if it was one person, or if it was maybe a teacher that you really liked or felt comfortable with? Or do you think outside agencies would be better coming in?
No, I definitely think one teacher should be be trained to teach like all of LLW, because there's so much in LLW. There's relationship, there's stuff about politics, there's stuff about money and all that sort of stuff. So I think if there was one teacher who was teaching it all, they could maybe go in more depth, and the lessons could be more productive, because the students are actually gaining knowledge by a teacher who is specific to that role, not just another teacher who is just doing another subject.
Yeah, I think having just one teacher would put a lot less stress on teachers having to juggle their subject with, a subject they maybe don't feel comfortable with or maybe equipped to handle. But I do think there can be a lot to be said for outside agencies. I mean, having, I know we've had people who've been affected by issues come into school and have talked about it, and it's been a lot more impactful than maybe a teacher who doesn't have that insight, who hasn't had that experience. And it can be a lot to ask for a teacher to be willing to teach some of the stuff. So I do think even if a mixture of both of those could be implemented, it'd be really beneficial.
Or if it was that one person sort of organising those people to come in, you knew that was going to happen during that one class. And do you think that it would necessarily have to be a teacher that could come in and do that, or do you think the likes of a youth worker maybe coming in and doing that would be adequate? Would you feel it would be as impactful if it wasn't a teacher?
Yeah, definitely, because a youth worker might have a more different view on it, because the teacher is obviously taught in a curriculum, but the youth worker might have a more open opinion about what's being taught, and they might say since they're a youth worker, they'll have more experience talking to kids, and they might feel more comfortable talking about the sensitive topics, and it might be more beneficial for both the teachers and the students.
It'll give you guys a break from listening to teachers all the time. Is that?
I know in my school we have youth workers who come in and chat to the kids, and even the fact that they're in normal dress and not in a suit or a dress makes it a lot more relaxed. They seem like more like us rather than somebody who's going to give you detention.
And they definitely wouldn't be letting you do your homework in those classes, sure they wouldn't. No, that's great. Thanks, Chair. Thank you.
Great. I just want to bring Cara in, as she had said she wanted to come in just at this stage before we go any further, if that's okay, Cara.
Yes, our young people mentioned there just about AI harms, and just to declare an interest, as I do an hour of work with an AI firm each month on AI ethics. Thank you.
No, thanks, Cara. We'll make sure that that's noted. So look, I think before we conclude the evidence session, I think Michelle raised it there. It is important that the questions that you put to us, that we deal with them. I mean, I think we normally discuss those things once the witnesses are out, but I think it's important that you're here for this. So I mean, I would certainly want to suggest in terms of the four things that you've highlighted, that question around is there need for action to be taken around LLW? I'm certainly very happy to confirm from my perspective that I think there is. I'm happy to hear from other members, but I think the general consensus we've heard across these issues is that we all agree there is significant room for improvement. Is there anybody who wants to add anything in particular to that?
I suppose, Chair, the anecdotal evidence that we're hearing is that LLW is largely used as a free period to do homeworks from other subjects, and that young people in schools aren't getting a lot of benefit, except in cases where there is a teacher, like you mentioned yourself, Danny, who is enthusiastic and passionate about the subject. So, there clearly needs to be some sort of change. That would be my view.
You, Deputy Chair Peter.
Chair, thanks very much. Chair, that really good research that the witnesses have done would seem to run somewhat contrary to some of that. I'd want to reflect that, especially the fact that in the survey, the Citizen Says survey, that in answering the question, do you think LW curriculum needs changed? Majority said no. In fact, double the amount of young people who said it should be changed. Now, it's just a survey, but I think it reflects a number of questions we'd want to have. Could be covered off by the fact that some schools are doing it well, some aren't. But actually the survey results that have been presented actually probably painted a lot better picture of LLW than I would have expected, given some of the evidence we've had. So maybe just want to reflect that.
Yeah, no, I think that is an important point. For me, what came through in the survey was young people's perception of how LLW is valued in their school. It is quite the satisfaction ratings with that were a lot lower. So it's maybe a question of not necessarily whether the topics are right, but whether you actually get the topics that you need covered in the classes. So, but I do think it is important. There is, and I said that at the outset, there is some positive feedback there from young people, and when it's delivered well by a teacher who cares about the subject, it can be impactful. On the back of that, and look, I think the next two questions you'd asked, I think, are very much an action for the committee, and is that will we really raise this with the minister? And I'm certainly happy to say that I think we should be, as I know that you will do already, but also we can share with the minister that we've received this briefing today, that we've received your report. Would certainly be very happy to suggest the committee would like to encourage the minister to meet with you. I know time may be short now for that to happen, but we would certainly.
Or he doesn't meet with us either.
Happy to. I was trying to not go too political there, Danny.
Danny.
So I think I'm certainly happy to suggest to members that we do that, and that we do then also seek a clear response from the minister in terms of the recommendations, and I think factoring in the curriculum review as well of what the minister's intentions are around any steps that need to be taken to improve the delivery of this subject area. And I suppose that probably speaks to the fourth point. If we do that, that's probably how we can, at this stage, help ensure your recommendations are heard. But I think as well, to keep this issue on the committee's agenda and to not just let it drop off as a single evidence session. We do also have our RSE report, which we will hopefully after recess be signing off, and that will be covered in the Assembly Chamber. And those issues around what young people are telling us they need to learn in school, I think is really important. But on that basis, our members agreed that we do follow this up with the Minister as I've outlined, or are there anything else that members would be suggesting they would like to raise in that communication?
Agreed, Chair.
No, agreed. Okay. So we have agreement on that. So I hope that's covered the questions that you've answered. I would like to just thank you again for your time. It's been an excellent presentation. And I think as other members, Peter in particular, had highlighted there, this is not an easy scenario to walk into, to have to present a report and then take questions that could come from members on any subject. So look, it's really very much appreciated, and we have valued your engagement on this and many other issues. So thank you.
Could we just get a committee photo with the
yes, I was.
Assembly, please?
She should have expected that I needed to do that, and I could get slipped my mind. Yes, I think if we maybe just quickly go into closed session or turn off the live feed, just so we can get a photograph taken, and then we can move back into open session. Okay.
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 Sound.
Okay, so that just for the purposes of the meeting and anyone observing, we just arranged a photo with the Youth Assembly there during that brief window of time with the live feed turned off. So we're moving on to item 7 on our agenda, which is an oral briefing by the Education Authority on special educational needs placements. So I would refer members to the clerk's cover note, that's at page 90, and a briefing paper from the Education Authority at page 91. And the meeting will be the briefing will be to discuss issues around placements of children and young people with special educational needs, particularly in key transition years for September 2025. There may well be interest from members to cover some other issues in the SEN area as well. So just while witnesses are getting seated, very happy to welcome to committee Dale Hanna, Director of Children and Young People Services with the EA, Peter Canavan, Programme Director of SEND Placements within the EA, and Seamus Bradley, Head of Service in the Shared Education and Sectoral Support section of the EA. So you are very welcome here. Look, very conscious that you are at a very, very busy and pressured point of the year, and no doubt that will come out in our evidence session, so we do appreciate you making time for committee. Today we felt it was important, given just the juncture we are at, that we did receive a briefing before the summer recess in terms of where we're at with placements. So really, I mean, I'm going to hand over to yourselves without any more preamble for any opening remarks you want to make, up to 10 minutes, so as detailed, or if you want to boost into questions more quickly, we'll do that as soon as your presentation is complete. So over to yourselves.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the opportunity to present today. So I do have some opening remarks. I think they're brief, but we'll see when I get to the end of them, and we'll be happy to take questions at the end. So look, as we all know, we are facing an unprecedented challenge amid this ever-growing demand for SEND provision. And what I would say, I think this year, in some ways, ironically, has been a hugely successful year for us. We have managed to create a huge amount of additional capacity in the system, working alongside a huge number of schools, but despite that, we're still faced with the challenge that we have a significant number of children that remain unplaced. I suppose I did want to give the committee a sense just of what EA has been doing over the last year, and I will very quickly just go through what we have done. So in terms of September 25, what we have done, we have engaged with over 670 schools. We've conducted 246 technical site visits to assess whether sites are suitable or not for additional accommodation. Out of this engagement, we have established 125 additional classes across 108 schools, which will be progressing for solutions for September 25. And there's an additional 29 classes for special schools as well. And to date, EA will have now created an overall total of 720 specialist provisions across the province, accommodating 5,000 children and young people with SEN. In terms of where we are today, we knew that we needed a total of 4,655 places to support children to transition for September 25. About 4,260 of those are in transition years. So I suppose to get to the point in terms of the numbers, we know that we're anticipating the actual pressure to be about 160 children that, as we currently stand, we don't have a school place for. We've managed to create approximately 1,150 school places, but we still have 160 that we need to find places for, and we're working really hard at that. And across that 160, about 100 of those are primary schools. So the biggest pressure is across our primary school cohort. I mean, there are barriers to setting up this provision, Chair and Committee, and whilst we've had the huge success, and I really need to extend gratitude to the 108 schools that have really bought into that and are setting up provision. I mean, the reality is that our biggest barrier remains the reluctance of schools to work with us to set up the necessary provisions. EA, we have the primary responsibility and we fully accept that, but unless schools work with us and agree to set up provisions, then we're not going to be successful. And despite all that hard work by many across the system right now, we're still only in the space of 26% of our schools have specialist provisions, which means that, circa 70 to 75% of schools still don't have specialist provision. We acknowledge and have said before, we know that in the early years of developing provisions, the support from EA was in some cases not good enough. But I am confident, and I want to provide assurance to the committee, that this is no longer the case, and we now have a comprehensive package of support to help schools set up successfully, and you might want to drill down into that later on. But suppose for me this really poses the question, what do we need to do to ensure the majority of our schools have specialist provisions? And that remains, I guess, in some ways a challenge for us to find out why schools are reluctant to set up provisions. We've done more than that this year. We've taken further steps, and in February we met with the department and we cited them on the likelihood that we may have a significant number of children placed in September. Out of that, the Chief Executive, myself and the Director of Education cleared our diaries for a week prior to Easter, and we spent time engaging with approximately 50 schools to attempt to encourage them to set up a specialist provision. We wanted to hear firsthand what the issues were from them. And as a result of that, and despite 3 of the most senior people in EA visiting those schools, we only managed to get 1 school to agree to set up provision for September 25, and we got 6 that were agreeable for September 26. Sadly, as part of that, and I have to report, we actually had a situation where 3 schools wouldn't even accommodate a visit from the Chief Executive of the Education Authority to at least have a discussion around what the issues may or may not be and the challenges that school may have faced. So again, we find that deeply regrettable. We escalated the issue again to the department and asked them to consider ministerial intervention, and as you know, the Minister intervened. And he wrote to 58 schools that we targeted, where we really felt these were the pressure areas, where we really felt that the schools could have potentially the ability to help us set up provisions, and he urged them to work with us to create sufficient capacity for the remaining school year. Out of that intervention, 1 school came forward to say that they would be willing to engage with us on that. So in terms of where we are today, we are definitely at a critical point. I know that the letter was shared with the committee this morning, and you know that our Chief Executive issued a final letter this morning urging schools one last time to work with us to place these vulnerable young people. And in the letter, he's made it clear that should this not work, he will find himself in the extremely difficult position where he's going to have to ask the Minister to provide some sort of formal intervention direction to these schools. And look, to be very clear, our Chief Executive really does not want to be in that position where potentially it could be interpreted that we are sort of butting heads against schools. We really don't want to be in that position. We want to work with schools collaboratively to set this up. The success of specialist provisions really needs schools to come on board and to set up specialist provisions. EA will lean in as much as we possibly can to support the schools, but we need schools to get beyond their reluctance to do that. So look, in conclusion, Chair and members, I want to give you an absolute assurance that our sole focus is on creating enough capacity for those remaining pupils. With that's our focus right now. How do we maximise the number of school places for those children that remain unplaced? And look, I guess I would urge both the committee as a whole and as you as individuals to publicly support the creation of these provisions within your constituencies and communities, because we are at a critical point. If we don't place these children, then these children, we haven't thought yet about what we would do, but we can't accept that children will be unplaced. So, Chair, I'll conclude there, and we're happy to take questions.
Thank you, Dale. I'll preface anything I say here just with a comment that clearly staff in the EA are working at pace to try and address this. So nothing that I say here will be a suggestion of any individual within the EA is not pulling their weight. But there's clearly a system problem here that we are interacting with, that you have on the one hand reluctance from schools to set up specialist provisions, but secondly a lack of confidence that if they do set up a specialist provision that they will be supported and resourced to deliver that effectively. To me that seems that those two things are sitting in the system at the moment. I'm not quite sure how we move past that. But maybe just to track it back a little earlier, I was at the event organised by Send Reform NI and Caleb's Cause earlier in the week, and a civil servant, an official from the Department of Health at that, used a phrase that struck me. He said, and he was being honest around the problems in the system, he said, we have a system that acts surprised when children arrive into the school system that need placements in a specialist setting. We have a system that acts surprised when those children then transfer into post-primary. We have a system that acts surprised when they leave school, and a system that acts surprised when they move from children's services to adult services in the health sphere. I thought that was a very good way of putting it, but it doesn't really move us on into why that is the case. So can I ask to move just a step back from what we're doing now, but if we're looking at when your planning begins for September 2025, from the EA perspective, are you in a scenario where system-wise you're looking surprised when the children arrive who you know are going to need placed in September?
No, I don't think we're surprised in terms of the planning piece, Chair. We're already, for example, we're already planning in terms of September 26. We know from area planning we have a very good sense in terms of what the profile and the trends are going to be with children moving forward. We had a really strong sense probably this time last year in terms of the overall numbers, what we needed. We would have known that, you know, in very broad terms around the broad geographical areas. The challenge has been then to try and get schools then in those areas to agree to work with us to set up the provisions.
Why are schools not responding to those approaches in relation to taking on specialist provisions?
So look, I mean, we do accept that there may be some anecdotal information out there. You know, this is a process of 3 or 4 years, and we do know that the support in year 1 and 2 probably wasn't effective for schools, but we quickly sought to readdress that. We do have a comprehensive package in place. In terms of the work that we do internally, it's probably, in terms of we call it the programme, the capacity programme. In terms of that work, that's a very agile group of people coming together every single week, trying to feed in real-time queries coming in from schools. Well, you know, what about Axe? Our teams have been out in the ground, and principal at Axe School has said, but if we had this would really help. And then we try to factor that in to build out the package of support. And even this year, within year, we've agreed additionality in terms of support across the system.
And what point in the process, Dale, are you engaging with schools to put a proposition to them? We need a specialist provision in this geographical area. So at what point, you know, if we're looking to placements in September 25, how far in advance of that date are you engaging with schools to set out what's needed?
The engagement was probably October, November last. Pete will know exactly when that engagement happened.
I suppose for September 25, we started the real engagement in September 24. But we've been doing this for 4 or 5 years. Last year, there was a letter from all the chief executives of the managing authorities around the February time. And that was followed up by a letter by the Permanent Secretary. So to the point of, why does the system act surprised? I don't know. Is the answer, because I'm not surprised about it. We've been doing this for 5 years. There's a range of reasons why schools are saying no. Some are saying we don't have the accommodation, either internally or externally, but they're not letting us out to help and do that feasibility. Some are it's not the right time, leadership changes, Board of Governors reconstitution. Some are saying that it's not for them, you know. So I suppose I put the schools into 3 buckets. One's a bucket of we will do this, And they have done it over the past 5 years, and with 720 provisions across 26% of schools. And we have a bucket of people that are saying no, and we'll have the ones in the middle that are saying we'll see how it goes. The problem is we don't have the luxury of time to do that organic growth that I would call it.
Could I ask another question on the back of that? And I was struck, Dale, in your evidence, you sort of set it up by saying we sought an intervention from the minister, and I was sort of waiting for what that was going to be, and it was a letter. That does strike me. There does not seem to be any real levers that anybody has to pull here. So I mean, can you be clear? Is that the sum total of what can be done?
Well, look, I think that's there's a complexity in that, Chair, in terms of we know that there's delegated authority to schools, and that's the system that we have, which is hence why we have to ask schools, and it has to go through boards of governors to be approved. And I think that's where there is probably some of the reluctance. I think in some scenarios a principal might be very keen, but board of governors could be reluctant, or alternatively maybe the principal's not keen and manages to convince the board of governors that now is not the right time. So that decision making, I think, is so much out with our control that it's very difficult for us to influence that. I suppose I would answer your question with, we know, if you ask me what would you want, I mean, from purely operational perspective, I would love a scenario where moving into September 26, we had absolute certainty that schools, there would be a requirement on schools to set up a provision. If EA comes asking and knocking your door, then from that point it's not about approving that. It's about working with the Education Authority to set up that provision. Now I know that's from my perspective, and there's other factors at play there, but that would bring so much certainty to the system, Chair. That would allow us to know that where we would have capacity across all the areas, that would mean that our link officers would be able to advise parents that there's spaces in school XYZ. It actually, and you may well ask at some point about the SARS team and phone calls. It would seriously reduce the amount of anxiety in parents. It would just bring so much more certainty. I call it business as usual. We'd be back into business as usual mode, and this would just be routine, and we wouldn't be up here talking about this with you.
I'm very conscious other members are going to be keen to come in here. I suppose I'll make a comment and maybe finish with a question on that. I mean, on the one hand, those figures of sort of maybe close to 20% of children presenting with a special educational need, not necessarily statemented, but certainly not reflected in percentage wise in terms of the schools who are actually taking on specialist provisions. So I think that's a real concern, and I do find it concerning that currently it seems that the minister asking either nicely or putting on a bit of pressure and maybe wording the letter a bit more robustly doesn't seem to me to be sufficient powers in the system to deal with this. But I am conscious parents watching this must feel, do they want to be placed in a school where the principal may be saying, well, we don't want to do this? And I think there's a concern there around the approach to sort of inclusivity in our system, around, just that sense that every school needs to just really, I think, get with the programme that children with special educational needs have a right to be educated, and there shouldn't be horse trading around who takes them and who doesn't. But that's a comment more than a question. In terms of just where we are now, we're looking into the summer. There are 160 children unplaced, better position than last year, but not where we want to be. What's the EA's engagement with those families going to look like over the summer, who will be in complete distress at this stage that their child going into a key school year will not have a placement?
Well, I suppose correct you, Chair, we're not in a better position than we were last year, because last year, whatever the number was, and I can't recall off the top of my head.
Raw numbers. The
numbers we had last year, I remember coming to the committee or articulating, we knew we would work our way through those children and we would get them places. So whilst,
to be clear, when I say better position, I mean the raw numbers. On paper, there may be less children still needing a placement. None of that's acceptable. The concern is that you don't have placements for them.
Exactly. So look, we will do something similar to last year. The Family Support Link Officer was very successful last year. Our SARS teams are still working really hard to get down to the actual children that will actually not have a place, and once we know those individuals, then those will be allocated to the Family Support Link Officers, and then we'll start to engage directly with them and try to support them as best we can over the summer period. We remain optimistic that the Chief Executive's letter will resonate with those schools, and that they will now engage with us, even though this is late. And I appreciate that for those schools, that's difficult for them as well, and it's late in the day. But I remain optimistic. Our focus is absolutely on, can we get these provisions set up so that children have some sort of certainty about what school they're going to go to. You know that from last year, Chair, that doesn't mean to say necessarily we will have the provision physically set up for the 1st of September, but I think the critical thing is that our children have a school place, and that those young people know that they're going to go to school X, go to school Y, and their parents know that. So look, we will do everything we can to wrap ourselves around those parents, but if that 160 pupil number stays the same, then what resolved it last year was the fact that we got a school place. And unless we get school places, I imagine that anxiety will continue to grow. So I suppose for us, we're in slightly uncharted territory as well this year in terms of how we would support those. And again, we'll probably have to, adapt and flex on the hoof in terms of how we support that cohort of parents in terms of whatever that final number might be.
Again, understand that the staff and the EA are working incredibly hard at the minute, but I don't think there's some phrases there will concern parents. Adapting on the hoof is not where we want to be in terms of our children with special educational needs. I'll open up to other members and start with Deputy Chair.
Thanks, Chair. I suppose one of the difficulties around the discussion we're having about specialist provision is because of the lack of strategic planning when it comes to ensuring there are enough special schools. And I think I'm going back 3 or 4 years, there was a need for between, I think, 9 and 11 special schools right across the north, at least 3 in Belfast. So where's the work on all of that?
So look, I will hand to Seamus, but look, what I would say, Vice Chair, is there is a really robust plan in place there now to look at that. And I'll hand over to Seamus, he can take you through some of that at a high level.
Yeah. Thank you. Just for the clarity of the committee, I'm here today in my role as the Assistant Director with responsibility for area planning rather than for shared education, as I was introduced at the start, just in case there was any confusion around that. In terms of area planning and strategic planning, so there are the strategic area plans that ran from 2022 to 2027, and within those we've got the operational plans, and earlier this year we published Operational Plan 2, so we're in the mid-section of that strategic planning at the minute. We work with the department, and with an awful lot of feedback from the department and from schools, we changed the approach. So previously we had 2 separate plans. We had a plan for special schools and a plan for mainstream schools. We brought that together, and what we indicated was we would bring forward a specific plan for special schools, and we've been working with all 40 special schools in Northern Ireland over this past number of months. The area planning teams have been meeting with them, as have our operations and estates teams, and we are now bringing forward a plan, an individual plan for each of those schools. It'll be called the Plan of Action for Northern Ireland Special Schools. It will seek to create an additional 6,000 places in our special schools between now and 2032, and that's to track the NISRA projections of the growth of the population need. So it doesn't all happen overnight, but it does grow. So we're facing a situation, and we've published this in Operational Plan 2. By 2032, 7 years from now, it's expected that there'll be anything potentially to 20,000 less children enrolled in our schools, but 6,000 more children will have identified special needs. So the profile of the children and the enrolments of our schools is changing significantly across the next 7 to 10 years. It happens gradually, but in terms of that, we've already started a significant programme of expanding many of our current special schools, so we can see dual campuses, we can see the expansion of schools on their current sites with modular buildings being added to them, and their enrolments are significantly more than they would have been 5 to 10 years ago. So staying in track with that is the aim of area planning and expanding those out over the next...
Okay, so it's going to be another 7 years at least, given these plans never finish on time, before there are going to be enough places for the numbers of children with special needs.
No, what we're doing is we're tracking against the projection, so we're growing the sector as the need goes up. So the projection shows an increasing number of children with special needs across that time period, and our aim is to grow our special schools in terms of their size over that period, and look at the possibility of new special schools as well.
Yeah, but never mind tracking over time. We need extra special schools now, don't we?
And
Yeah.
we're working to expand each of the special schools as quickly as we can. Some of them are currently constrained by the site that they're on. Some have the ability to expand, and we've done that where we can.
But the bottom line is we need between 8 and 11 new special schools, or the equivalent of a special school right across the north. Isn't that right?
That's
Okay,
what the figures
fair
are
enough.
showing.
And in the meantime, we're dealing with these specialist provisions. And we've heard some alarming evidence there from yourself, Dale, that a lot of these schools either aren't prepared to take children, or aren't even responding, or aren't cooperating at all in this. How many grammar schools have specialist provision?
Well, look, the grammar schools, so there's about 80 grammar schools. Currently, none of the grammar schools have a special
Did you say
provision.
one?
I said none of the
None.
grammar
So
schools.
there's not one grammar school in the whole of the north that is prepared to open a specialist provision for children with special needs. Is that what you're telling this committee?
So I think what I want to do is say we have the grammar schools are up for conversations with us, and we will be working with them to set up
How long has the
provision for
conversation been
September
going on,
26th. I mean, I suppose.
No, how long has the conversation been going on?
What we want to do, the most important thing here is.
I want to stop you there. How long has the conversation been going on?
So, in terms of the conversation, and what we're trying to do is to make sure that we get appropriate places for the profile of the children with the special needs. That is the most important thing for us. That may be that some of the selective schools may well be the selective, or might be the most appropriate setting, and I am certain that many of those schools have an appetite and are keen to engage with us. And I think when you're speaking to us this time next year, there will be a significant number of grammar schools that will have specialist provisions.
So you're able to talk into the future. I'm talking about the past. I'm going to ask you this one more time. How long has the conversation been going on with grammar schools about setting up specialist provision within them?
I think realistic, to answer your question absolutely honestly, that conversation has only really started properly to happen this year. We have been able to find specialists. Remember, this year we haven't been able to find specialist places. It's just very different to previous years. So we have been able to find specialist settings across the rest of the system.
You tell me when the conversation started, the grammar schools weren't involved in that conversation?
Again, Vice Chair, whenever we were setting up provisions, there would have been already a system and a profile and a model of provision for specialist settings across schools across the province. Predominantly, the reality of that is that those settings would have been mostly non-selective schools, and that is where we first went to in terms of trying to address the need in terms of the communities. As this has continued and the challenge has continued, we've understood and we know we're going to have to reach out, and all schools will have to play their part, and I have no doubt that the grammar schools will do that. But look, I'm not here to defend grammar schools. The point is there are 80 grammar schools, but if we're saying that 25% of schools only have it, that means there's circa 750 schools that don't have specialist settings, 80 of which are grammar schools. I still want to talk about the other 690. So look, they're an important part. I believe they will play a significant role moving forward. But I don't want to ignore the other 690 schools that are equally not playing their part at this stage.
And most of the grammars have better resources than the non-grammars. And the difficulty here is it's the non-grammar sector which is doing the heavy lifting. It's the non-grammar sector which has the greatest percentage of newcomer children as well, children who are in care and so on. They're doing the heavy lifting right across the board, and the grammar schools are abdicating their responsibility in this. And I suppose what we want to know is, what is the Chief Executive going to do, and what is the Minister going to do about this?
Well, look, I can't say what the Minister's going to do about it, but in terms of what the Chief Executive has already made it very clear to us that for next year we have to have a dedicated work stream which is focused on how do we encourage and bring along the grammar school sector to be able to be part of this journey along inclusive education. I mean, I think we also... Sometimes we trade terms in terms of specialist setting and children were saying. I think I do need to make the point that all schools do continue to have children that will have a statement of special education needs in their population, including grammar schools.
I know that. I'm not asking about that. I'm asking about specialist provision, yes, which is something entirely different. And the grammar schools, not one of them, is prepared to establish a specialist provision in their school.
And I want to give you the assurance that when we set up specialist provisions, that it is the right and appropriate place for that child, irrespective of the category of school.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. Michelle, you had indicated next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the information so far, which you appreciate is really difficult to hear. I think it's important that charted this as the start to humanise this in terms of the staff and resources in EA, but this comes down to kids who are not getting placed in schools right now and the distress for their families. So I can't imagine what's like for them. I think you've come into this committee today with a very careful framing of how you're going to position the issue here and whose fault it is. You've positioned that very firmly as schools being at fault here. There's media coming into this committee which has set that scene as well. I would like just to bring it back to the fact that, and I think you'll agree, this is a crisis. This is a crisis that you knew was coming. This isn't a one-time thing that's happened just this year. This happens every year. And the responsibility for that is with yourselves and with the department. Would you agree with that?
I fully accept. Well, I fully accept that the primary responsibility rests with the Education Authority. That's where the statutory responsibility lies. I think, however, responsibility is much broader than just the Education Authority. In no way are we trying to blame schools. This is not about a deliberate framing, and yes, we are trying to be careful.
Definitely sound like that.
Well, and I apologise. I am trying to be careful with my language. But you'll also note I thank the schools that have already done that. However, schools, the reality is schools are reluctant, and there is comprehensive support there. We as the Education Authority are more than willing to support those schools to whatever the barriers are they have for setting up the provision. We want to work with them collaboratively. We can't do this on our own, and ultimately the specialist provision will be in the school, and once it's set up, it will be for the school to run. Those children will be part of that. It will be children from the local community in that school.
Because the picture you're painting there is of one with there's lots of support, and if you set this up, you're geared up and ready to provide that support. We had head teachers sitting here a couple of weeks ago, and they gave us evidence on a range of things. And one of the presenters made a point about this pressure and the pressure to take kids from for send placements to set up SPIMs. And the evidence he gave us that they were taking kids to keep them safe, that they weren't resourced, that they knew they were taking kids in who they couldn't provide appropriate support to. So can you understand why schools would have that reluctance when that's the experience that we're hearing from schools right now, that the ones who have stepped up are now saying they feel terrible they couldn't provide the children with the school experience and the access to the curriculum that they deserve? And that's an equity. And the Chair mentioned earlier the Caleb's Cause event. We had a statistic of 22% of those who were surveyed in that said that they felt like their children were getting an equitable experience in school. That's not good enough. And the evidence we're getting already from the head teachers is that what's happening right now is not good enough. So you can understand why schools would be hesitant about getting involved with that process, probably for the interests of those children.
Absolutely, and look, we're equally interested in those children as well. I mean, to give you a very high level, I mean, in terms of a specialist setting, what we will do is a bare minimum. EA funds the teacher. EA will fund a minimum of 2 classroom assistants. They get up to £20,000 as an initial setup grant. EA will ensure that all the refurbishment work or modular accommodation is done, and then on top of that, there's a £3,000 allowance for the running costs. So, and on top of that, if there's other sort of bespoke ad hoc costs, we will consider those. We also have our specialist support team, which has continued to grow every year and is specifically there to support those settings in terms of getting up and running and setting. that's, Michelle, not me saying that any of this is easy. I understand that for head teachers it is absolutely a challenge for them on the coalface. They're the ones that are having to implement that on a daily basis. You know, I'm not detracting from that at all, but we are here to support, and we listen to the head teachers and we listen to the system and what it says, and if we have to continue to go back and try and find other ways to support, we will.
Are you adequately resourced for this though? Do you feel you have adequate resources that will incentivise schools to get involved with this?
I believe that to date we have been able to be agile in terms of, you know, changing how we provide resource, and we have been able to do that. And one only needs to look at the increasing cost there is around SEND provision. Much of that is to do with the support and the provision that we have provided. So yes, I do believe last year.
So I'm going to, because I know my time's going to run, I'm going to ask one last question before you go. You have referenced, and you've referenced in the media and the letter that's gone out to schools today, the implication is that if, well actually the actual wording of it is, you're going to set up, if you're not successful, you have no option but to ask the department to consider a process to formally instruct specific schools with available capacity to establish necessary provisions. What does that mean? What is the power that you or the Minister or the department has that will compel schools to do this? And if that power already exists, why are you not using it?
So EA does not hold that power. We do not under any. Well, we're asking the Minister to consider whether they believe himself and the department have the power to compel schools to do that. I don't think anybody in the system wants to be in a position where either the Education Authority or the department have actually, you know, had to use a legal instrument to compel a school to set up a specialist provision. The optics of that look really, really poor, but nonetheless, equally the optics of 160 children not having a school place in the 1st of September, I think, is probably worse than the optics of us finding a way to create a scenario or create a situation where we actually can get to work together with those schools, to work with them, get in, lean in with them, support them, and try and get these children places for the 1st of September.
It is challenging for us to understand, especially like Pat raised, that there are a cohort of schools who are just opting out of this or able to opt out of it. And I think if there is a possibility that they could be compelled, and there's a lot to work through if that was necessary, but it feels like this is not a surprise, and why are we not looking at this earlier? It just feels like we are sitting on our hands on this process a wee bit, that there are things that you could do that you aren't doing that would help resolve this, and we're looking towards next year now. So I think I don't envy what you're trying to do here, and I predominantly feel for those kids, but none of this is a surprise, and this crisis can't just be pointed in the direction of the schools for not cooperating, and I'll leave it at that point there.
Thank you, Michelle. Donna, you'd indicated next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you. Look, no matter what I say here, I'm not blaming you, but I am extremely angry even listening to some of the exchanges here, because I have well over 40 cases myself of all different levels of transitions, and I know the nuts and bolts of this here. For me, it's a numbers game. You come in and you'll still say, oh, it goes into the adequate places. You know, I'm going to ask you a five-track question. Are we discriminating, our education system discriminating against children with special educational needs? Would you say it would be?
I don't think that's for me to say.
I think, because the reason why I asked that is because when you replied to Pat around the grammar schools and he says the adequate, I'm not going to name anywhere, but you should be able to work out where I'm talking about. A transition year where children last year were put into an education centre, then would move to second year to then a SPIM, would have time to set up. You would agree with me, these are the children who need stability and support the most, but yet that's another big move for them. Now, would you agree with me that some of these, and where they'd be doing a great job, and fair play to them for stepping up and helping, so that's why I'm not naming them, but they would not be able to deliver a proper curriculum to those children because they wouldn't have, for example, a science lab or a home economics department or outdoor facilities, etc., etc. They wouldn't have the 5 pitches that some schools have and get brand new pitches laid and facilities for community to use, and we're having these pitches built everywhere instead of schools. So how does that stack up to what you were planning to Pat? Because they aren't adequate.
Again, I take you back to the position that the Education Authority finds itself in, that it requires the schools to make a decision we engaged with all the schools in all the areas.
Point is, you were saying to Pat that the reason we weren't talking to the grammar schools is because we had adequate settings last year and 4 years before that, but clearly you didn't. So why? What I'm saying is, this was happening last year. Kids are getting put into settings that aren't fit for purpose. You know, we know what, that's they're not fit for purpose per se, but to give the full curriculum. That's what I mean by that. Because I don't want to put off parents who may be getting these offers this week, because that'll be the only hope.
Yeah.
And I really don't want to do that, and I know parents will be listening and watching that, but that may be the only place that they get. So I'm just asking you to come back and say it's not. I don't believe your interpretation that the PAT was fair. Then why grammar schools weren't at play earlier in the day?
Well, look. Again, I think there's two bits there. I mean, I think I answered the piece about the grammar schools. We are engaging with the grammar schools, but the point I want to make, Danny, about is these are special settings for children with some really potentially extreme special additional needs, and we need to be really careful that the school that we work with, whatever that school is the right school in that, and we will work our way through it. But I have no doubt that moving forward, that all of the schools will need to play a role. In terms to your point about was it suitable, I think there's no doubt that in terms of last year and this year, the arrangements that we put in place, we will be very honest about that. They're not suitable, because there will be children who, whilst placed at a school, because of a variety of reasons, will be involved in a contingency arrangement for a period of time until we can get the permanent arrangement in the school. So I'm not going to disagree with you on that.
Okay, so out of the 1,150, because you've seen, you were giving that like a positive of the places that were created then, how many of them are actually suitable places for these children?
We believe that all of those are suitable places for those children.
Okay, so children who with additional needs, who could be at flight risk, who are well known, who transition into first year, are being offered places in schools that are up to 13 and 14 miles away from their home.
Look, again, I'm not going to split hairs with you, but if you live in Fermanagh, you might have to travel 25 miles to go to your nearest suitable.
And this is why I'm going to bring about this, because I know I'll probably run out of time, and because again, to me, it's not adequate. These are the children who need the most stability and support, and they'll not get that. So in my opinion, they're not being placed in the right places, because even last year, going by the cases that come in my constituency office, so many of them end up out of school for long periods of time on reduced timetables. So I'm going to ask you this: do you believe a change of approach, like it was touched on about compelling, because I think this will be a part of this, a SEND first approach, would that change the mindset? And that's not a soundbite. Let's change the mindset of schools, that we are going to place children with special educational needs first, and then everybody else after that, or at the very least the very same time. Is that the approach we really need to take?
So we thought you might ask us that question.
Mm-hmm.
We've had some really robust conversations around even what SEND first means, and I think, you know, we believe, and I counter the phrase, I think schools need to be SEND ready. Yeah. So if it's a specialist setting, the SEND first potentially may work, and I know that there's work ongoing, and Seamus might talk to that about the supernumerary piece. We know that potentially SEND first, we absolutely would support that if that's in, say, for example, children being placed into mainstream settings. But there are consequences of that, because potentially mainstream children might be displaced because of that.
Yeah.
In terms of
sorry to interrupt me, but that's why I made my point at the very beginning about, are we discriminating against children with special educational needs? So that answers me there. That tells me that a consequence could be that mainstream children. Look, I couldn't imagine for one second what it's like my child's going into first year next year, if the offer had to come in going, no, your child's not getting a place, he's going to get an education centre for 1 year, and we'll transition him the year after. And by the way, in that centre we don't have the great facilities that some of our other schools have.
I mean, look,
I could just ask brief final comments on this, and then we'll need to move
just
on to the next.
Very briefly, and I'm happy to engage with you beyond today on this. Look, quite often the pressures we face are in places where schools are already fully enrolled and they do not have the physical space. So there are some schools that have quite rightly found themselves in the position of having to say back to us, we can't take any more pupils because we don't have the physical ability to take them. You know, the space just isn't there. And that quite often is a pressure in urban areas. So the SEND first approach would be a change in how we actually manage admissions across Northern Ireland to every school. And that's a matter for the Department of Education. And right now there's a public consultation on that, as Dale said, about the supernumerary.
All you're doing is window dressing with that if you don't actually have a SEND first approach.
Alongside that, there is the temporary variation consultation that's underway. So there are a number of linked pieces here that potentially could create future levers, and certainly we would be encouraging anyone to feed into that and to bring forward particular pressures or particular issues, because there potentially could be new levers that could be introduced to the system in terms of how places are allocated, whether saying first as the approach that needs to be taken. And I very quickly would just caveat that by saying, as we go forward, as I pointed out earlier, from the NISRA projections, we're going to see a drop in the overall enrolments in our schools. What that translates as is there will be space in existing schools moving forward. Now the question is, how do we manage that space, or how do we use it? Do we keep the same number of schools but designate parts of those schools as specialist provisions and support that and make that work so that young people can remain in their local communities? Or is it a different model in that we increase the size of the special schools, but they can only be in so many places, so you will end up with children continuing to travel to those. So there's a number of questions around what we want and what we mean by inclusive education moving forward.
It feed into the consultation, sorry, and it's the best education that comes from all children is what should be the best. Thank you. Thank you.
You, Danny, and look, I'll bring Peter in next, just to very briefly, and it may not, in case it doesn't get attention. I think that issue you just raised at the end there, inclusive education, the phrases inclusive education policy and a SEND policy statement, they're sometimes used interchangeably. I think they are different things, but I do have a concern in all of these conversations that we don't quite know what the overarching policy intent of how we want SEND education to be delivered actually looks like. And we could head off the track and pile a load of money into special schools or pile a load of money into special provisions, and in 5 years' time an inclusive education policy might say, well, actually we want to do it like this. So I think we do need a lead from the department on what that looks like. That I put that out there as a comment. It is part of the SEND reform agenda, but I'm not sure of where the direction of travel is with it, and I think that leaves us a little bit shooting in the dark. But Peter, I'll bring you in.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks very much for the evidence this afternoon, gentlemen. I mean, it's a really sensitive area, and like Danny, I've got a number of cases that I'm dealing with at the moment. But some of my questions have been answered on the way through. But if I can, I'll maybe pick up on what Seamus was talking about in terms of that drop in number and the effect, a drop in pupil numbers and what offsets the plan that you were talking about there, Seamus, will actually kind of deliver. I think it was a 7 year plan up to 32 you were talking about. Okay, so I suppose my first question is, clearly there has been additional pressure on the sector with the rise in the number of kids presenting with special educational needs. Specialist provision is one way of addressing that. I mean, I'm going to look at it from the other end and look at the special schools, if that's okay, if that within your area and remit. I mean, what is your view on whether we need additional special schools in Northern Ireland? If we do, how many should there be, and when would they be delivered in broad terms?
So in broad terms, the plan of action lays that out, and we're identifying, so we've taken each of the 40 special schools as they currently stand, and when we publish the plan, it will indicate the future planning for each of those schools moving forward. As I said, the aim of that is to create 6,000 additional spaces in special schools in Northern Ireland. One of the key things...
In special schools?
Yes. Yep. Now, one of the key things, to go back to the SEND Reform Delivery Plan, is it talks about special schools acting as a hub within their local area. And so there are different models here that are emerging, not just in Northern Ireland, but nationally and internationally, that we can draw on, we can learn from. So that concept of the special school acting as a specialist hub for children and young people, able to link out to other schools, and we're seeing that in places, and it's mentioned in the SEND Reform Delivery Plan again, Stroul with Arvalee at the heart of it, but there are other places that we have special schools that are either already co-located with local primary or post-primary schools, or are very close geographically and are able to work in partnership. And so exploring how the special school operates as part of a local place-based environment is something that we need to develop as we move forward. This is not just about transporting children off to a different type of school or a different type of provision. This is about educational excellence, and actually for many of the children, that ability to mix with their peer group, the socialisation and the opportunities that different schools and the facilities that different schools have, and I think we talked about science labs, maybe technology and design, sporting facilities and so on, is going to be important moving forward. So it's how that pathway is charted, but certainly that concept of a special school as acting as a hub that supports and engages with the other schools around it is going to be very important moving forward. And that's part of where we need this to move as well. And we're already seeing many of our special schools, they've been involved in area learning communities at post-primary for a long time now. They're involved in shared education, they're involved in extended schools and a range of programmes. So ideally we work with them to expand that, their influence and their expertise into other local schools, and then the other local schools providing access to facilities and expertise that they may have. You know, so where that co-location or close geography is, I think we can build on that.
Chair, if you don't mind, I would maybe put a slightly different lens in that as well, and what Seamus has said is absolutely right. I think the answer does not necessarily lie in special schools. There's work there to be done. I think, you know, we often talk about there's the SEN reform agenda and there's the piece about early intervention, and it trips off all our tongues around that. But actually, part of the solution to our SEN difficulties is addressing the actual needs of children as the needs are presented as early as possible. And we know that some of the work we're doing around the local impact teams is all about how we can move the continuum, that graduated response, away from having children to have a statement at stage 3 to redivert resource to our schools and to support our children at stage 1 and stage 2 of the code of practice. And actually that's where I think that is the key part. It shouldn't be about just increasing specialist provisions, increasing special schools. And back to your point about inclusivity, what we need is a system where the needs of our children are met in their local schools by the local schools who are properly resourced and who have the professional support in the school, and the teachers in the school are properly trained and they have the real skills to absolutely address the needs of children. So look, it's a slightly different lens than looking at it from that perspective, but for me that's where we need to take the conversation to. You know, there's an increase of children getting stage 3 statements. We need to address that. We need to make sure we have less children with statements, but we need to make sure they address their needs at the earliest possible time. So I think we can't lose sight of that.
Dale, I agree completely. I feel I'm just going to get one more question in here.
To be fair, the officials, you get 2 answers to your 1 question, so I'll give you a wee bit of latitude.
Okay,
apologies, Peter.
That's fine. I should be asking more difficult questions. Okay, look, I'll make a comment and I'll ask my second question. The comment really, Dale, on your response there, I think it is mission critical. You didn't use those terms, but it's mission critical that the local impact teams get it right. Now, as a constituency MLA, I'm hearing, mixed stuff around there, and I know it's bedding in, and there's reasons around that. That stage 1 and stage 2 thing is critical, but there is not yet confidence out there in the sector that there'll be enough push and direction to actually make this completely work. Now, it's not fair to pass judgment on, I'm not. But what I am saying is that this is really, really important. And
say another question.
Another question? Yeah, okay. So the other one was something that was raised earlier around the issues and challenges that schools faced. And I think in the answer that was given, it was about support and resource. Okay. I suppose my question is, there's a little bit of answer to it. I'd be interested in knowing, is there anything else in terms of fears of schools for not agreeing to specialist provision other than those 2 things? Or are those 2 things the only reasons that maybe they're not, in your view, that they're not agreeing to specialist provision?
Brief answer, Dale.
I think those are the key reasons. I think there has been other commentary around some schools just don't feel that, those children are the right children for their school. But what I would say, that's the absolute, 1% that is, it is not, it is, I think the fears as outlined are the key fears, Peter.
Okay, and from your POV, he says stretching his luck here. From EA's perspective, you're saying that if a school does take specialist provision, they will get the support and resource back up from EA.
I mean, that is what we're there to do. EA is there to support schools. Now, we know we don't get it right all the time, and we may need to go back to the drawing board and go, what more can we do? But we will do that.
Yeah.
We will go back and try to provide more support.
Draw a line at that point. Cara, you were next.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you to the panel for being here today. I just want to echo members' comments about this is deeply frustrating and year on year continues to be an issue with placements. But I'll just veer away I have an ongoing issue in my constituency to do with placement of a child who has SEN needs. Now, when it comes to SEN placements, obviously there's many stakeholders. There's yourselves, there's school, there's parents. In this particular case, Dale, I don't know if you would be best for me to direct this question to. I have two separated parents, and one of them has a history of coercive control. And one wants their child to be in a mainstream setting, and the other wants to veer down the special school setting. And I'm just wondering, I found it, in my experience, quite a unique case to work on. I'm just wondering if you can speak to that and maybe just advise the committee on how the Education Authority, has it ever come across a case like this when it comes to SEN placements? If so, how often? And what do you do in situations like this? Because ultimately, we want to serve the best interests of the child.
You've asked a really difficult question. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to answer it very well, Cara. I think yes, we will have faced scenarios where there are, dual parental responsibility, and I think in those cases we would just have to work through those cases on an individual case by case basis, and try to work out what's best for the individual child. So, look, I'm sorry, that's probably not a very good answer because each individual case will have to be considered on its own merits. But those would be very difficult circumstances.
Maybe I could chase you privately.
You can, absolutely, that's fine.
But just off the back of that then, so this child in particular only goes to school for 45 minutes a day, I believe twice a week. It's during the hours of 11 to 12, and the mother of the child cannot work due to the restrictions that causes with travel to and from this mainstream school. See, when it comes to reduced timetables and placements, how does the EA overlook that? And if you could just speak to that, I would find that really helpful.
Well, fundamentally, the timetable of the pupil is a responsibility for the school, and we would certainly support the school if we can, if there are issues. Now, clearly, there must be an underlying issue why that individual pupil is not able to attend on a full timetable. I'm not sure, without knowing the detail of an individual case, to be able to respond to you more fully around that. But primarily, the responsibility for the timetable is with the schools. But look, I think I accept the point that in that scenario, that would be very difficult for the parent if that individual child is on that reduced timetable. I mean, the purpose of a reduced timetable should also be for a short period of time to deal with whatever is the particular issue, and then there should be efforts made to get the young person back into school as full time as possible. But look, we have a range of services and supports there within the Education Authority that we can try and support the school to help manage that pupil back into what would be a more normal timetable. So look, if you want to come back to me privately about that, I'm more than happy to look at that for you.
Yeah, because the parent, again, just sort of feels like their child really isn't getting a fair, full, equal access to education. But just a final point then, Dale, is this something you would come across a lot, that this sort of disagreement amongst parents and how that shapes the placement of a child? Is that maybe more common than, this is the first sort of case I've come across, but is this something you've come across before?
I suppose in my look across all the services I've either managed or currently managed, there have been, every year you may come across one or two cases where parents disagree about either the service that's being delivered to the young person or the particular school maybe that they're seeking to be placed in. So yes, it happens. I wouldn't want to use the word common, but it does happen, yes.
Okay. Well, look, I'll follow up with you personally,
Okay.
But other members have answered my questions already. So thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cara. Kathy?
Thanks, Chair. Before I get into questions, I just want to clarify something that Pat had raised. So you said that there are SEN children across all sectors. So a couple of years ago, there was 5.6% of pupils in grammar schools were SEN pupils. 25.2% were pupils in non-grammar schools. That's quite a stark difference. Just as another matter of fact, in that same year, only 1.1% of year pupils going in to grammar schools were newcomer children. The figure in non-grammar was 5.8%. So there might be children in those sectors, but there's huge variances in the difference in the numbers. To pick up again on things that other ones have said, I'm sick, sore and tired of hearing saying placements and crisis in the same sentences. It seems to be just year after year. And my fear is that we're going to be sitting here, I'm going to be sitting here next year, the following year, and we're going to be in the same position. I would really hate to be the parent of a child who doesn't have a place, or even someone who does have a place in a SPIM at the minute listening to this today. And Dale, I'm not putting this on your shoulders. It would have been really good if we had the Chief Executive here, because it is ultimately the responsibility of the EA. You will always come and face the music, and I'll give you dues for that. If I was to say that the reluctance from schools to take up these SPIMs is coming from the fact that they don't believe that they will be adequately resourced or that they're going to get the support that they need, would you agree with that?
No, I wouldn't agree with that.
Can you tell me why?
Well, because we believe we have listened to schools in terms of the resources that we need to provide.
No, I'm not asking whether you think you give enough resources. I'm asking, do you believe that that's why? That there's a perception out there that the EA will not be able to give them the support that they need.
I accept that for some schools that may be the case. Yes, that may be part of their decision making.
Okay, well I'll give you an example. I have a school at the minute that doesn't have a SPIM. They are in a battle with the EA at the minute trying to get a disability ramp into their junior school. They can't get a disability ramp in there to allow pupils with disabilities in and out of the school. So can you understand that they're sitting there now going, how am I going to trust the EA to put a SPIM in here and give me the resources and the support that I need to do this? Do you accept that?
Well, look, you're presenting it, and clearly in the circumstances that you present that one school, then I understand how that potentially could feed into their reluctance around setting up a SPIM. But I would counter that by saying, let me have a conversation with that school and let me see what we can do to resolve. They're having
conversations with the EA day in, day out. They're having battles with the EA to try and get minor things done to the school. They don't believe that this is a minor thing. This is a disability ramp, and they cannot get it done.
And look, I'm not wanting to take the conversation into a different space, but yours, I know that the committee's had evidence presented previously around the pressure in terms of the backlog on the maintenance budget, and EA is literally in a position where it has to potentially only do, which is those absolute essential works, which would be to ensure children are kept safe. So look, I accept that the school is struggling to get that particular ramp without knowing the actual detail, but I accept the overall point you're making there.
That's only one small issue. You know, clearly this is happening in other areas as well. But look, there's so much that
suppose, can I pose the question back? Suppose for me, I appreciate that for that school, that's creating reluctance in their behalf. Just maybe somewhere in EA we haven't done something as well as we should have done. But that shouldn't mean then that they have the option to opt out.
I'm not saying that does, Dale. What I'm saying is this is the perception that they can't get support from the EA for this one simple thing. So how can they trust? Where's the trust that they are going to be able to meet the needs of these children with support through the EA? I've lots of other questions I want to ask. So in terms of, there's lots of schools who have these SPIMs in at the minute, and they're operating to the best of their ability, and they have got an intake of children. The concern is now, though, where do these children go next? There's obviously a cohort of children that need to go into those SPIMs, and we need to move them on. Is there a succession plan for those children who are currently in those SPIMs that are going to need to move on, that went in last year, that are going to need to move on either next year or the following year?
I mean, the answer to that is yes. Part of our planning is we need to ensure that we build pathways in for those pupils, be they starting their journey in P1 all the way through to P7 and all the way through as they transition. And the work that Seamus and his team have been doing is very much about trying to plan that out across the geographical areas. So yes, there is a plan in place to do that, and we know that we need to provide those pathways. That's been one of the significant lessons learned. So whenever we were starting to put in provisions, we looked at nursery schools, but very quickly nursery school pupil transitions into P1. So it was very much, we need to focus and make sure that we capture that pathway. So when we set up a specialist provision in a primary school. We were also setting that up with the plan and with the view that there will be a pathway for those children moving into Key Stage 2 within that setting. So yes, we are doing that.
Confident that plan's in place for those things that are established?
We have a plan, but again, it's back to some of that will require schools who may not currently have provisions to be willing to set up specialist supervision, particularly at that key transition point in P7 moving into post-primary school, to agree that they will work with us to set up a provision.
Okay. Again, I could continue on with that, but another thing that comes up year in, year out is around the communication with parents. And I know the staff are all stretched. What's the plan this year for those children who aren't placed at this minute in time? How are those parents being communicated with? How are they being reassured? Are they being kept updated of everything that's being done for them?
So look, I'll answer that in two ways. So last year, and I spoke earlier that we're going to put in place the Family Link Officer support. So whenever we know who the actual children are that we believe are not going to have a school place, they will have a dedicated link officer, and that person will be available to them. Every single day they can contact them, and they will be the contact into the SARS office. And I know there has been criticism about the contact with the but I suppose I would turn that on its head. That is also a symptom of the fact that we're not able to place children, and parents get really, really anxious and find themselves in a position where they're having to make multiple phone calls into the Education Authority. The staff within the SARS service are overwhelmed with the volumes of calls, and we have put additional staff in there. And I suppose what I would say back, why don't we put a system in place where there's certainty in the system and where schools know? If all schools were set up in such a way that they were required to set up a provision, then we could calmly plan our way through the year, and we could be saying to parents, be assured your child will definitely have a place. We could be talking to parents, the link officers could be talking to parents and saying, here's the range of schools that we think may be suitable for your children. Express your parental preference, and we as a system would generally be content to know that there's enough places in the system.
That's not where we're at this minute in time. So
I understand
that. Will that communication
brief
team?
Final question and brief answer. Yeah.
Will that communication team, there will be a full capacity of staff there during the summer for parents to be able to speak to? I know you're saying about making multiple phone calls, but whenever you can't get speaking to somebody, that's why you have to make multiple phone calls in numerous times, and parents getting more and more frustrated and more worried as time goes on.
Look, I can only answer by saying the purpose of the Family Link office there is to give that person, to give those parents that direct contact with somebody in EA, so that they don't feel like they're not being able to contact their link officer. That was successful last year. We believe that will continue to be successful this year.
And that team will be at full capacity over the summer?
But, I mean, okay, we also equally need to manage staff annual leave over the summer, so we will do that. But, we have mums and dads who have children and young people as well, and we need to manage their annual leave commitments. So look, we will do that, but there will be a Family Link officer that will be available to those families all the time.
And Cheryl, you'd indicated.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for coming to the committee today and for the update. I suppose I just want to take it back. There was words at the start there about finding a place, and I know in essence that what we're doing for these children, but I just can't make it more obvious and clear. Like, this is one of the most important things in their life, is getting the right placement. And it almost feels at the minute we're kind of trying to do whatever we can to get a space for a child. And for a parent, all you want is the very, very best for that child, to get the best education, to get the best start for them and access to all the services that they need. So it's so difficult for parents when they're in this situation to feel that their child isn't being treated with the respect and the equality that they deserve, in this situation. So I want to go and speak about collaboration with departments, because we often talk about data sharing with health. And the Department of Infrastructure as well in terms of transport. So at this stage, we're talking about placements and we're talking about the actual physical building. But one of the things I'm hearing is the issues with transport also. So a child may have the physical place in a school, but they don't actually have the correct transport, or that transport may be putting a child that has maybe got a P1 place or a nursery place. They're actually on a bus for an hour and they're only going into school for an hour. It just doesn't make sense. sense, and parents then are feeling that this again isn't the appropriate placement. Again, whenever we're looking at health as well, a number of these children will have additional needs that require specialist training for the schools, which again we don't have the capacity for because of workforce. So it's a collaborative thing. It's how is this working together to make sure whenever a child does get their physical place that they actually have everything else in place that makes it suitable for them.
So I suppose I'll take that into it. In terms of the collaboration with health, I mean, on the ground, the practicalities are that our staff are engaging with the trust staff on a routine basis in terms of identifying the children. We know where they're ultimately going to be placed, and that the therapies need to be provided. I mean, but to the point, do health have enough capacity to provide those therapies? I'm not going to answer to that because that's for health to answer. In terms of school transport, you're absolutely right that as we continue to have a broader spectrum of placements across the system, that creates difficulties for the school transport network. Other factors play into that. We know that a lot of those children may need taxis, but elsewhere the number of taxi operators has reduced, so the capacity in the market is seriously reduced. We also have a scenario where the school transport policy as it's currently written is very broad, so there's little constraint in terms of who ultimately gets school transport. And so one of the pressure points is that we will have numerous examples of where we're providing transport to children who may live less than half a mile from their school. So that the question that I pose back is, we need to look at, is it reasonable that resource is used to take that child half a mile when perhaps it might be better placed to take the child that's slightly further away? So there's lots of factors in there, and I think the school transport policy will need to be reviewed in the longer term, particularly around the SEN space, because if the rise on children is as it is, there isn't the network capacity of transport to be able to provide every child with door-to-door transport. So we're going to have to look at how do we think about that transport provision, and should we look at it in a slightly different way?
No, and I think it's so important, the fact that the children are, almost on it could 15 minutes down the road, 20 minutes down, but obviously because of that journey with pick-up times and turnaround times, a child, as young as maybe 4 or 5 is sitting on a bus on their own for an hour, it isn't suitable. And as a parent, would anyone feel comfortable with that? And it is a difficult thing, and I think it certainly needs looked at how we approach that as well. I just want to touch on, and I don't know if you will have the data, but around what proportion of children with SEN have received placements at the same time as their mainstream peers. Do you have that information?
No. Yeah. We have it here, don't we?
I would be able to provide it. I don't have it, but this is one of the things. And Danny, to your point around the SEN first, there's so SEN children with statements, they're treated as the individual and what their individual needs are and what the best suit and most suitable place is for them. From the admissions perspective, that's 20,000 people all at the one time with a start date, or a start time and an end time, and then it's through the criteria. So with the SARS process is a 24/7, 365 day a year process, with the 26 weeks, etc. So actually up to the 10th of May was the year 8 transitions. We had 90% of year 8s placed. I don't know off the top of my head what the P1s were and the nurseries for those. We can provide that. Yeah. We do track that, and but as I say, actually, in a lot of times, SEN children are placed before their peers in mainstream. So.
Well, it would be good to get that information. I just want to touch on staff as well. I see how hard and what a difficult job it is for staff working within, whether it be SPIMS or special schools, and how they're absolutely fantastic with children. From a workforce capacity, how do you feel that there is the staff and the workforce? Is it there, and is it available at the moment to make sure that children are catered to, they're supported, and obviously it's a very high standard as well of care?
Look, I think the reality is the workforce is a challenge, because what we need are teachers and classroom assistants. We already know we have a very stretched classroom assistant workforce, and there's other conversations and debates going on about that professional model of support. So it is difficult. It absolutely is difficult. That is one of the challenges of schools, to recruit appropriate teachers and classroom assistants into the schools. I suppose, again, I'm going to sound like a broken record. Back to my point, if we knew and there was certainty in the system that schools were going to take on a placement, EA could work from now to help support schools for next year. But quite often we find ourselves, it gets late on in the year, which creates a shorter window of time to allow both the school to recruit and to allow us to support them. So I suppose my point is, if we had certainty and knew that schools, if asked, were going to set up a provision and that was taken as read, then I think we would find ourselves in a position where some of these real issues, tangible issues right now that are facing schools, we would be able to mitigate significantly against them and manage them in such a way that schools would find it much more helpful.
And there's no doubt that staff are operating in very intense environments.
Sure.
No problem. No, it's just a last comment. It was just, obviously staff are operating in these very high intense environments, and staff sickness or in cases injury, and classes are actually having to close down on this basis because they can't get the workforce, and again children are losing out on this. So I know there's a mammoth amount of work that has to be done, but it's just taking it back to the child and just making sure that every child receives the best place that they can and the best start to life, and I think that's so important when we're moving forward. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Cheryl, and thank you all for your evidence. I want to finish with a final question and ask for just a brief answer, but I think it is really just in terms of where we go next. I think some of the things I think that parents have listened to, and look, I appreciate it's been an honest briefing today, but I think parents watching this will if they do have a child who's unplaced, will be extremely concerned listening to the evidence today. I think you used the phrase, Dale, about potentially if we can't find those placements, I think you used the phrase adapting on the hoof. And Peter, you had said that you perhaps don't know what we'll do in terms of September if we don't have those places. Can you give us any sense, or are we looking at children on reduced timetables? Are we looking at children having to share placements effectively on half time in schools? Are we looking at some alternative provision that would go in? What sort of options are on the table, or have you not considered that?
Nearly some West Chairs I don't want to share that, because some of those options are really unpalatable, and we really do, our focus over the next, I suppose, literally 3 to 4 working days is the Chief's letters out there. There's going to be senior colleague engagement with those schools tomorrow, and let's see where we are. Plus, I want to see actually who are the children. So what we do will depend on the individual child and who they actually are. And I think that's the important thing, that we then start to look at those individual children line by line and start to bring a bit about the individual child as opposed to just talking about a number. But looking forward, yes, if we really find ourselves in the position where we don't have children placed in a normal way, then I think we will probably be looking at options which are something along those lines, reduced timetables or potentially some sort of dual day with existing provisions. But I don't think we're nearly not thinking about that at this stage.
There's no one around this committee table wants us to be there.
Yeah.
So I think we want to make that very clear, and we hope that is not something that we're coming back to reflect on in September. Look, we thank you for your time, and we know.
Do you mind if I just ask Dale,
very briefly,
when did the letter go out from the Minister?
The letter went out about 2 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago.
There's another one now going out from the Chief Executive?
Yes. So the letter from the Minister went out on Thursday the 5th or Friday the 6th of June. Right. They were to respond, schools were to respond to us by Friday, unfortunately the 13th of June. And then subsequent to that, we've taken stock of where we are, and the letter that has gone out from the Chief Executive has gone out today, and with an extremely urgent...
We just got that this afternoon, where we were sitting here. Was the Minister asked to put that letter out as well?
In terms of another letter?
Yeah.
No, well, I mean, this is very much a letter that our Chief Executive felt that he needed to send out at this point in time before formally going to the Minister to ask for intervention.
That letter, there was no request to the Minister to put that letter out, no?
There was engagement with the department about what was the appropriate next steps at this stage. I think if the next step will be that the Chief Executive, if we find these letters are unsuccessful, is that our Chief Executive will be asking the Minister to consider making that more formal intervention.
Was there a suggestion that letter go out from the Minister, and the Minister declined to do that?
Well, no, there was a range of discussions, and then I think our Chief Executive felt that it was more appropriate that at this stage he wrote out to schools to advise them that he felt that we were now getting into this territory of a position where potentially he was going to be obligated or forced into having to ask the Minister to provide formal intervention.
Okay,
thanks. I think we can pick up perhaps in terms of actions arising what issues we want to raise with both the EA and the Minister on the back of that. Thank you for your evidence today.
Thank you.
We'll be in touch soon, no doubt. Okay, members. So just to draw that to a close, I anticipate there's likely to be appetite to engage beyond just the receipt of that evidence. I think I would just say on a broader point, I mean, clearly that's a deeply concerning evidence session that we've heard. I regrettably don't think any of it is probably that surprising to members, but no less concerning in terms of the position we find ourselves in, and there are a lot of aspects to it. I'd want to put on a general point, and we'll come to this later in the agenda, but I think when we're looking at what the committee should be dealing with post-recess, I would want to suggest that we have a very clear focus on all of the elements that are going into the system-wide problems that lead to this situation every year. So I would want to be recommending clearly that we have a very, very focused set of engagements around special educational needs after the summer. Danny?
Yeah, I just want to say, that was very worrying, especially that last bit of it, and I would like to know exactly what the Minister's going to plan to do, because ultimately it would fall on him to step up to the mark. And we've had lots of presentations this year, and none of them were pointing towards this direction where we have. In fact, others were going to saying we're on a different path, and if you believed everything with the percent, everything's going to be okay. That parents out there, I'm really angry listening to that today, because the more answers you were getting, the more questions that were coming off it. Cara even asked about reduced timetables. There's loads of children on reduced timetables from last year and the year before because they weren't placed right, and we also heard loads of evidence that so many children who would benefit of a unit are then put into mainstream classroom, and their displacement and their education is being impacted. I don't think they have a full handle on it. What I took from the evidence there is a send first approach could work. So see if it could, why are they not doing everything possible now to explore that? And that has to come from the Minister, because I tell you, that's an absolute disgrace.
Could I suggest, I mean, I don't think at this moment in time that sending a letter to the EA will get us very far. They are clearly absolutely, up to their necks in the process of trying to deal with this crisis right now. I'm not sure that a correspondence will help, but I would suggest that we do put our concerns in writing to the Minister. I'm happy for members to feed in with anything in addition to what I might suggest. I think we should be seeking a clear view from the Minister in terms of the EA seem to be setting out that they're saying that they believe either the Minister has powers that he can exercise and isn't, or that he needs to seek those powers if he doesn't have them. So I think to get clarity on that in terms of if there is anything more the Minister believes he can be doing to enable him to direct schools. I think there is a wider question around the SEND reform agenda, and I would like to hear a clear articulation from the Minister as to what is set out in that SEND reform agenda. How will that make this situation that we are in this year better? And I would like to know that in clear terms. I don't believe we have heard that articulated clearly, and I would like to see about getting a response around an inclusive education policy to set out how does the Minister actually foresee the how we deliver education for all pupils in the system, and where does he anticipate how that will operate in terms of finding placements for all children. Those are the areas I think that have stood out for me, but I'm very happy to hear from other members and anything else they want to ask, Deputy Chair.
Sure. I mean, I have never been a great fan of these specialist provisions in mainstream, because all the evidence suggests that they're not going to get the full wraparound support that they need. And okay, that's problematic. We hear there's now a plan in place which will roll out between now and 2032. Whether that happens or not remains to be seen. So I suppose what we're left with is the specialist provision in mainstream. And in my back and forth with Dale there, I mean, it seems to me that there haven't been conversations with the grammar sector about this. And I think that's absolutely disgraceful. That if the EA or the department are leaving the grammar sector to the side and pushing all the heavy lifting onto the non-grammar sector, I think that's an absolute disgrace.
If I could respond to two aspects of that, you raised the special schools issue, Deputy Chair. I think one thing that didn't come out is any clear articulation on the special school front about where the money's coming from. Are we confident that there is a budget? And I know there has been a specific capital budget set aside for special schools, but I would like to get clarity as to when's that investment going to be released. When are we going to see these schools being built? I think that could be in the correspondence. Very happy to raise the question around how is the Minister ensuring that all sectors are stepping up to ensure that they make those provisions work. I would just remind members of our visit to Bangor Academy and the SEND provision we saw there. And that was a specialist provision. It seems to me when a school is voluntarily stepping up and saying we want to make this work, this is part of the identity of who we are as a school, that it really can work and does work. But it's that inclusive approach to education across the board that I think we really need. We need that culture shift within the system. We'll certainly take those forward. Peter, do you want to?
Yeah, Chair, just a couple of points. Look, I mean, clearly there's an enormous amount of pressure on the sector. I think we have to be cognizant that when schools are asked to take on specialist provision, some schools just don't have the footprint for it, and there will be schools that perhaps just could not fit in another unit, and there'll be a whole sort of range of reasons, I guess, why maybe they're not, and it's probably not for us to get into that. On the point that Danny made, it's worth just being clear in terms of what the responsibilities are here and understanding what the powers are. So EA has a statutory duty to provide these places. That is their job. That is not the department's job. There's a statutory duty on EA to do that. What they are talking about is asking the Minister to direct schools to take SPIMs. He has that power to do that under the 86 Act. It's very rarely used. And clearly that came across in the conversation this afternoon, because effectively that would be asking the Minister to tell schools to have SPIMs, and as the witnesses suggested, that would be contentious for a whole range of reasons I'm sure most of us could understand. So, that's where we are. I have no issue with anything that you're suggesting. It's just worth clarifying, in particular those points. On the earlier evidence, just that Seamus gave us, I mean, I wasn't just too sure where the operational, I don't know whether it's a strategic plan or operational plan in terms of that provision. I'm not sure if that's a live plan that they have or if it's a plan in design, but if it's a live plan, that would be good to see in terms, specifically in terms of they're doing modelling around falling pupil population and offsetting that into additional, if my understanding is right, offsetting it into additional special needs places. I would quite like to see that if it's possible to get our hands on that. That would be good.
Yep, no, it absolutely would. Yeah, I know. Yeah, because the operational plan too has just done a quick double check, as it only takes us to 2026. So, but where they were talking about something much.
They're talking about the next 7 years.
Yeah, so it'd be good to see what the status of that is.
Sure, we have a mini inquiry in the Senate.
I would be very happy to hear members' views on that. I mean, my view on this is that we can call it whatever term we want, but I am very clear that our next number of evidence sessions from September onwards need to be on SEN and nothing else. And if that results in a committee report with recommendations arising from it, I'm absolutely content with that, because I can't see any other issue in the system that is clearly requiring the level of attention that this issue is. So perhaps we can come to that on forward work planning, but I've already discussed that with the clerk, that to me seems to be the area that we need to be focusing a large amount of our attention on from here on in. Now it's for members to make a decision collectively whether we want to frame that as an inquiry, but that does what we've seen with the mini inquiry into RSE in terms of it can exclude other issues in terms of what else we can look at, but happy to have that conversation if members want to maybe finish off the conversation on the letter to the Minister, and then we can either take that to forward work planning or cover that now, so whichever works best for members. terms of the correspondence to the Minister, is there anything else we want to add? Cheryl?
Sorry, no, Chair, it was just to say, obviously I'm just here for a wee while, but the PAC committee, we're in the middle of an inquiry into the school estate, and obviously there's the NI Audit Office report on the school estate, but there is reference to saying, and obviously the issues with the estate there, so it might be some useful information for you if you're taking it forward.
I noticed that the committee had real interest in that report, but the PAC obviously took the primacy on that. But we're very keen to engage on that, absolutely. Okay, well, our members agreed in terms of the content of the letter to the Minister. I know we may be coming from slightly different perspectives, but I think the issues that we're seeking clarity on, I think that there's agreement on, so we can move on from there. So to Danny's point around scope for an inquiry, do we want to have a discussion on that now, or is that better sitting with forward work planning? I'm conscious, obviously, we have Hansard here and just the officials waiting for the next session. If we're happy to carry that to forward work planning, if members are agreed. Okay, agreed. Okay, so on that basis, just to check in terms of anyone seeking a comfort break, is that something everybody would be keen for? Yes. Now we are a wee bit running behind, but just to...
So unusual for this committee though, Chair.
I know.
Did you say running behind?
No, I know. But I mean, it's the members asking the questions. If you'd like me to cut you off,
not this
Peter,
member, Chair.
I'll happily cut you off as soon as you hit your time. If we could just move into a closed session or turn off the live feed, and we'll...
Committee Room 29, sound. 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 Committee Room 20.
Okay, so members, that moves us on to the next item on our agenda, which is a briefing on the School Uniforms Guidelines and Allowances Bill, and it's an oral briefing from the Department of Education officials from the Bill team. So hopefully they're ready to join us online. We should have joining us Margaret Rose McNaughton, Director of Transport and Food in Schools in the department, and Shirley Sweeney, the head of school uniform policy team in the department. So we've got Shirley. Hi Shirley, thanks for joining us. Can you hear us okay? Is the audio working?
Just unmuting there, Chair.
That's great. Thank you very much, Shirley. And Margaret Rose, are you able to hear everything okay?
I can indeed, Chair, yes.
That's brilliant. Look, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining our committee meeting today. So, I mean, I think that the purpose of these attendances at committee, I think, are largely probably to give the opportunity for question and answer, but very happy if there's anything you want, any opening remarks you want to make at all for members just at this stage, or we can move straight into question and answer.
Well, I would just say, just to give you a little update on the work that we have been doing since we last met. As I previously said, we have been testing these guidelines with the on the workability and practicality with schools, and we want to do that with some parents as well. So that process has begun, and we met online with a number of school leaders on Monday, and that was the first of these, and that covered the primary and secondary school landscape. So in fit of that discussion, we are now considering what, if any, further clarity, and there will be further clarity required to the guidelines. And then in addition, the focus groups will be testing these with the parents in particular. And again, I mean, those focus groups I think are due to take place within the next, within certainly this week and next week. I'm just not sure the date they started. And when we get the feedback from those, then of course we'll need to look then again at what we need to change, if anything, in the guidelines, and again what clarity we need to provide. In addition, I'm conscious that we have a couple of letters from the committee. Now I do know that you did ask for a response by Tuesday, and I mean we simply weren't able to get the response to you in time. We do need legal advice on that. And then we will, once we get the legal advice, we will respond as soon as possible, with all the obvious internal approvals that we need to go through, but we will get them to you as quickly as we possibly can. So that's where we are. I'm very happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Margaret Rose. Just at a general level, I have a couple of sort of very specific clause-related questions I might want to raise, but just on a general sense of where we're at, you're referring there to doing work to sort of test the guidelines with parents and with school leaders and with teachers. My understanding was that the minister was of the view this bill had the capacity to have gone through all of its assembly stages before summer recess. Can you help me understand how we're at a point of just testing guidelines in terms of practical workability at this stage in the process?
In terms of the guidelines, what we're testing is the practicality of the guidelines as written in relation to the bill as presented. Now, we do know that is likely to change, and we will have to address whatever amendments come through in guidelines as well. But we want to be clear that schools understand, what it is that the guidelines are making them do.
Just to come in, I do understand that it is absolutely right. We would be very critical of the department if you presented us with guidelines that hadn't been tested with schools and parents. Of course we would. My concern is that it was put to us by the Minister that extending the committee stage, I think, to the end of the summer, which in practical terms doesn't really give us opportunity to engage with educational stakeholders, but that was a compromise position. He believed that the bill would have completed its assembly stages, all of them, committee stage included, with guidelines ready to go by the end of this month. So how in that basis, it was the end of May for the committee stage, I think, and then the full stages by recess. So how can we be in a position where, if that was the timeline that the department was expecting to operate on, that the practical outworkings of the guidelines hadn't been tested? Was the bill just brought forward too quickly? Had the work not been done?
Well, the guidelines obviously hadn't been developed at that stage. The bill was brought forward, from the point of view of the guidelines. When the bill was submitted and went through the first stages and then onto committee stage. And when we were going through the guidelines, and we were going line by line as we are now with the bill, it did become apparent later that there are issues here. People can take a different interpretation of some of the things that we are saying in the guidelines, and that is why we are in the position that we are in now. But we need to be absolutely clear that the guidelines will work. This is all about making them work and working for parents then subsequently, because if they don't work for schools, it's not going to work for parents either.
For the committee to understand then just what timeline we're on, when do you think that testing works? So this is notwithstanding any amendments, and again, this was a point I raised in the debate in the chamber around the committee stage, that a lot of what was being presented by the Minister, and indeed the amendment that was brought to the committee stage, seemed to be based on the presupposition that there would not be amendments. But notwithstanding any amendments, just on the bill as drafted, when will that testing phase end, where you're confident that the draft guidelines on the bill as drafted are robust and easily understood by schools, and their legal effect is clear?
Well, as I said, the focus groups are taking place. I'm not 100% sure of the dates on those, but I think it's within these, this week and next week. We then need to get the feedback from that. Both Shirley and I are working on this and we'll be working on this all over the summer period. So I couldn't give you an actual date of when they will be ready, but certainly, and on the bill as drafted, we would be very hopeful that it would be certainly by the end of the summer. We will then have to look at the amendments whenever we get the amendments, and then look at what changes then need to be made to the guidelines as a result of that, and take a decision at that point then as to whether we have to go back again to test this with schools. But if the rationale for the amendments is clear, and if we're sure of what it is that the amendments are doing to the bill and asking of schools, well, that's something that we'll be able to then just discuss with the schools.
And will we just on the last sort of general point, and then on to just a bill specific question, then I'll open up to other members. Will we see the guidelines before consideration stage? Because that to me, in my mind, in terms of any member's reflection on whether amendments are required or whether they're already covered by what the guidelines will provide, it'll be very difficult, I think, to have a coherent debate on potential amendments to the bill if we don't know what's in the guidelines. So is that an assurance you can give us that we'll get them?
I don't want to give you any assurance on that today, Chair. I mean, that is something that we will need to work out within the department as to where we're at that stage, and just to what extent that they can be shared. But that'll not be a decision for any of us here to take. But we will be discussing it obviously internally.
Well, look, I think from the committee's perspective, this has been a really difficult process, because we feel we're shooting in the dark, because we're doing our very best to try and produce amendments that we think will deliver the impacts around affordability and also on some of the equality issues that we've heard clear evidence on and that we've heard from our constituents that we feel came through in the consultation, but we don't know what the guidelines, even on the bill as drafted, will look like, and I'm concerned that will make even debating this through the remaining stages of its passage through the Assembly very challenging, and it just feels entirely disconnected from the message that was presented to us by the Minister in terms of this was a basically, bill ready, drafted, good to go, and there really was nothing more complex to be considered. It was ready to be done and dusted. So I am really concerned. I think just in terms of the integrity of the committee process, I think it's really important this is on the record that the lack of the guidelines is causing real problems in terms of how we progress our work, and I think the fact that we now don't have assurance that the guidelines will even be available for consideration stage, I think will make that task extremely difficult for all members when we come to debate this in the Assembly. But I'll leave it at that on that point, because one of the things the committee has been looking at is obviously a range of amendments, and I'm noting in the bill there are powers at clause 1 for A and B that give the department some powers around, maybe with some flexibility, to look at transitional arrangements or savings arrangements that might need to be put in place. Certainly in terms of how I've read that, but it would be good to hear from the department in terms of those flexibilities that are built into the bill. Is that on the understanding that there may be a need to create a phased approach to the introduction of some measures, including potentially amendments, to give a scope for a bit of a soft landing for schools to phase things in? Is that, have I understood those powers correctly? Because I think the committee would be keen to get assurance on that nobody wants to deliver something that overnight will create chaos, but we are very keen to understand as well that the department is clear on what those powers actually will allow them to do in the bill.
I think sorry for my
no, go ahead, Shirley.
I was just going to say that clause 1.4 is absolutely, so it provides, as you say, Chair, for transitory transitional saving provisions, and it's intended to allow for that type of approach that you're describing, in order to make sure that, fundamentally this has to be workable for schools in order to benefit parents, and that's just the thread running through every piece of work. What I would say is that is in the bill as introduced, which applies to the framework of the mays and musts as they are in the bill currently. So where I know there are a number of amendments looking at changing some mays into musts, and I think that we would probably need to be taking legal advice in terms of how those two pieces sit alongside each other. Where something must be covered in the guidelines, it must be covered. So we'd need to take legal advice in terms of to what extent then transitory, transitional or saving provisions could be applied to that, because I don't think it's intended to be a general catch-all, but so it is sitting there in the bill as introduced with that framework approach.
But just to be clear, notwithstanding legal advice, the intent behind that clause is to provide some flexibility around phasing of how the guidelines might be introduced in terms of schools and the practical workability of it.
Yes. Okay. Yes, fundamentally, yes.
Nope, that's very helpful. Thank you. Look, I'm happy to open up to other members. The Deputy Chair, if you want to come in first.
Thanks, Margaret Rose and Shirley. You're saying that you're testing these guidelines with parents and schools and focus groups and so on. If the guidelines can be shared with them, why can they not be shared with the committee?
We haven't shared the guidelines with them, Vice Chair. We have given them, an indication of what is likely to be in the guidelines, based on the particular matters for inclusion from clause 2 onwards, and that is around issues such as, single supplier, branded items, and that is to test from them what their understanding of those issues are. And one of the areas we need to be clear on is the impact that this might have on rural schools with a single supplier. If you just pick a single supplier, bearing in mind the accessibility for parents in rural areas is not as it would be in urban areas. So the guidelines haven't been shared with them.
Can you give us an indication of what might be on them?
Well, if you look at and we have said constantly, if you look at the current guidelines and all of the issues that are in the current guidelines, and then the particular matters that are mentioned in the actual bill, we will be, stating or putting in guidelines around the branded items, around the single suppliers, around where are they? Designing a uniform. These are all issues that are already, in the current guidelines. So in around comfort, around a transition period, sustainability issues, and then it's around developed in partnership with pupils and their parents, and the requirement to publish. And we've been very specific about the issues that they're going to have to publish, and around then the reviews of the uniform policy, and then a bit around monitoring. And then, the equality, human rights, disability, and other legislation. We refer to that again because that's something that runs through all of this legislation. I mean, those kind of sit over and above what we're trying to do here in the school uniforms bill, because every public authority has to have regard to and has to comply with the equality legislation. We will be equality proofing and rural proofing the guidelines as they are finalised and when they are finalised. So those are the broad issues that are going to be in the guidelines. Of course, the devil is in the detail.
Sure. And just one final question. Can you tell me what the expectations are in terms of affordability? What are the savings going to be for families when it comes to buying school uniforms? Is there any? Have you an idea of what it's going to amount to, percentage wise, financially wise?
I wouldn't want to put any kind of a figure on that at this stage, but what we would say is that schools will need to be looking at their lowest income households, and that will be taken probably as those on free school meals. That's the only indicator that we have at the moment. It's the best indicator that we have at the moment. So if uniforms are set at that level for everybody, then they should be affordable.
Okay, and sorry, just one last one. What's the feedback you're getting from the schools that you have been dealing with so far?
In general, schools are certainly the ones that we have spoken to so far have been saying, well, they welcome the guidelines, but the one thing they want is a very clear guideline. They don't want something that can be interpreted in a different way. And it was clear, from what we were suggesting on Monday, that there is the potential for them to be interpreted in different ways, and that is really would be concerning, because that then leaves the way open for loopholes and for schools to get around things, and that is absolutely not what we want to happen. But in general, there was
and neither do we, Margaret Rose. So thanks for that.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. Any other indications here on this item? Yeah, Michelle.
Everybody else is going to go. Hi, thanks very much for coming today. Thank you for your responses as well, the document that's included in our packs. I just wanted to get a wee bit of clarity on and this is genuine questions. I have a wee bit of a concern that perhaps for some of the amendments, there's a repetition in the language here in your responses around it is not linked to the provisions in the bill about pupils or clothing, that we're trying to find technical reasons to disqualify some of these amendments. Can you speak to that? Because I know if I look at the memorandum that comes with the bill, it does mention affordability, comfort and sustainability as being at the centre of decision making that you want from parents around from schools around uniforms. So it feels like a lot of this is compatible with that. So just give me a wee bit of comfort that we're not trying to technically get rid of some of these?
Well, if I maybe start, and Shirley, you can come in as well. But you know, the way I mean, our amendments our comments on your amendments are intended to be helpful, and I suppose the way we look at these, what we when we're looking at this, the first thing we ask ourselves is, right, well, what's the problem that we're trying to solve here? And it's not clear from some of the amendments when we link them into the bill as drafted. It's not clear what the problem is that we're trying to solve, and what why it would take legislation to solve that, because of its equality issues. As I said, those are wider issues that are fundamental, I think, to any policy that's been prepared by the department. But Shirley, you might want to come in a wee bit more on the specifics of the language there.
Yes, and look, this is based on us and trying to take legal advice. So it's the difference, I think, and it is part of the challenge in any of this. Michelle, we're talking in terms of, in a layman's term, I see some of what the amendment's trying to do. It's when you place it into legislation, and our legal advice is looked at which clause that's been set under, and some technically that doesn't always align. So we've tried to indicate as best we can within that, but also it has to be rooted in the provisions of the bill, and it's trying to look at that. It is based on legal advice fundamentally, as opposed to our how I as a non-legal person might read it. And I think that is a key challenge in all of this, because we've said many times before, each word in legislation it's intentional, and it has to be so carefully thought through. Could it be interpreted in different ways, in which case then that leaves a wider open to challenge, and is it schools who are going to be challenged on that? Now, if they are not adhering to the guidelines, fine, but if it's because of wording that's been used that wasn't intended to have that effect, that's where we really need this to be careful in terms of the language used and the provisions that it seeks to put in place. So, for example, just looking at some of the amendments, accessibility of play-based curriculum, outdoor learning, what is meant by that in the context of the bill? Could it be interpreted as meaning that schools have to provide access to outdoor learning? Again, that may not be the intention, but if that wording was used in the bill, could that be interpreted as that? Because what if you're in an urban school that doesn't have access to much outdoor space? It's taking it to the thinking through every potential unintended consequence, but it's coming back as well, looking at it, as Margaret Rose has said, beyond the requirement which for the guidelines to include provision about the comfort and practicality of clothing for pupils. What is the intention and the need for the amendment? And it's looking at each amendment through that. So as Margaret Rose says, it is intended to be helpful, but it is also based on us taking legal advice.
Okay. I think we're going around in circles by restating again and again that if we had the guidelines, this would be an easier conversation. I appreciate your perspective and that you're getting legal advice on that, but I think in the absence of actually really being clear on how these provisions are going to work in practice, we are trying to make sure that this bill delivers in the way that we intend it to. So I guess as we game of chess, we're going to keep playing the way through this. I want to ask again as well about the branded items. So it seems to be a key aspect of the affordability. We've heard evidence from the department that you're looking at branded items. There's stuff in the bill already on branded items. So I'm still not clear on what your definition of a branded item is. Have you bottomed that out yet?
The bill definition of, well, that's of specific styles, which included branded items. That was clause 8. Sorry, clause 8.2. No.
Clause 9.
Is it more? Sorry, Michelle. Is it more the question in terms of what the guidelines might say would be branded items as
no
opposed to
sense
what's
of if
already
we were
in the
going to
bill?
limit the number of branded items, what you would consider to be a branded item that would qualify to be part of that.
So,
are we talking colours? Are we talking a logo? Are we talking, you know, I think we've been through this before, but I'm not sure we've settled on a definition. And again, that's again for us when we're trying to think of definitions, we're trying to think of how this might operate. We just would like some clarity on that. I just want to be understanding if you have that clarity at your end.
Well, you know, I think we don't have the full clarity on that yet, but I think what we are trying to bottom out with with the work that we're doing at the moment with schools and subsequently with parents is what, and in terms of branded items, I mean, most people's understanding is the big sports gear.
Yeah, I mean,
branding.
To interrupt,
That's
Margaret,
one.
it's just, I know we have different perceptions, what people might understand. I guess at this stage of this process on a bill, and this being such a crucial element of it, do you really not know what branded items means yet?
No, it's not that we don't know. We have our views on what we intended branded items to be, and I go back to the proposals in the in the consultation document, where we were saying the term branded item is not just an item with a logo. It's used to describe an item of clothing with distinctive characteristics which make it unique to the school. As a general rule, if an item cannot be purchased at a range of suppliers, it is likely to be a branded item. So such items are often designed specifically for the school and are unique in colour, design or fabric. That by unique, we don't mean black, grey, brown, you know, it can be. So that's our starting point. You know, for instance, a blazer with a school logo embroidered onto it, a sweatshirt, blazer or jumper with a specific coloured trim, or trousers with a unique style, which are therefore only available from a specific supplier. Those are all the areas that we would be classing as branded items. So, you know, in comparison, a navy skirt or a grey cardigan that can be bought from a variety of retailers wouldn't be considered a branded item. So we're back to the proposals in the consultation document. So yes, you know, we have thought about these, Michelle. It's just that we need to be clear in the guidelines.
Yeah, no, Margaret, I know absolutely that you've thought about it. I mean, there's elements of that throughout the documentation. It's just whether you have decided, whether you're clear at this stage on what your final definition of branded is. And I just want, this question is not to be pedantic on one particular point. It's to get that sense of just how developed the work is on the department side around all of this, and that is the one I picked out because it's so critical, especially to the affordability piece, that we would know that at this stage.
But that's what we will be going with, and that will be subject to the testing. I mean, what are the views, you know, of the parents? What are the views of the schools in relation to that? Now, what we did hear on Monday from some schools was that the pupils themselves wanted to have a specific, what I'd call sportswear PE kit, and that came from the pupils when they, you know, schools then designed their uniform around that. But my issue was, but actually it's the parents that need to have the say in here, because it's them who will decide on the affordability. So while the pupil voice is very important there is also the need to make sure that the parents' voice is included in that too.
Agreed.
Nope, that's fine. Just in terms of time, we'll move on. So Cara, you've indicated.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for being here, ladies. I just have one question. I'm bringing forward an amendment based on road safety. Now, we met with Stephen yesterday from the Bills office, and he said road traffic might be more appropriate than road safety. I'm just wondering then, is there anything already in the guidelines to do with road safety, road traffic?
Not with road safety or road traffic at this stage. There was I think one of the amendments that you sent through to us did talk about that, didn't it? Shirley, I can't get my hand on it here, but again, I suppose what I would come back to say is, in the first instance, so what is the problem that we're trying to solve? and how can we do it? Do we have to use the legislation to do it? Is it about markings on clothes in terms of road safety, or if it's road traffic? Is that what does it mean? Basically, is what I'm asking.
Yeah. So for me, this came off the back of recently we had a motion passed in the Northern Irish Assembly regarding, I suppose, the dangers that children face where we're from as well. Just, particularly the winter months, we have, later starts, particularly in our rural areas as well. Children endanger road traffic. And there was a recent death, sadly, in Mid-Ulster with a young girl who was hit after coming off a bus.
Yeah.
And just because we are on the topic of school uniforms, yes, ultimately it is about affordability for families, but it's also a moment for us to kind of shape and safeguard our kids as well. And something along the lines I shared some ideas just with members briefly yesterday was around potentially like Velcro patches or armbands, anything that's cost effective but ultimately protects our kids. So that's kind of where my mindset is. I'm speaking with Stephen hopefully later this week, if not next week, to kind of tidy it up. But he had said road traffic might be more appropriate.
Okay, well, if road traffic, I don't know, honestly, is the answer here, because we would again need to test these with our legal people. How does that fit in with the purpose of the bill? But I mean, sorry, I can't be of any more assistance really on that.
Okay, no worries. Thank you
That's
very much.
Okay, thanks, Cara. I think I've just got an indication from Peter. And that's
as long as that's okay, Chair.
Yeah.
You had a question at the end of that sentence.
I was just double checking there. I haven't missed anybody.
No, you haven't. Margaret Rose, perhaps the easiest question so far. What is the purpose of the bill in your mind?
Well, the purpose of the bill is to make it mandatory for the department to publish guidelines on the cost of school uniforms. But the reason why we brought this bill here in the first instance was because of the very real concerns there are out there about the costs of uniforms every year for parents, and that is the main purpose of the bill. Now within that we have looked, of course, at comfort and at and sustainability, but the main purpose is that to compel it, not to compel, but to make it mandatory for the department to make guidelines for schools on school uniform policies, and of course, the clause 2, is it? Makes it guidelines under this chapter must include provision addressing unfair costs. So that's the unfair costs. It's the guidelines and the unfair costs are the fundamental issues in the bill.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm tempted, my next question to ask, do you and Shirley dream about uniform clauses at night? But I'll skip past that, and I'll instead ask you whether or not, so there's been a bit of chat about commencement, which is clause 15. And obviously, in the way that the original bill was drafted, sections 3 and 4 will be at the 3 and 4. The department will place into law at whatever time it sort of deems appropriate. So at royal assent, we'll have everything but 3 and 4, and at some point 3 and 4 will come into being. What is your view if the entirety of the bill came into operation at the same time, effectively at royal assent, would that cause any particular problems in terms of what it might mean for parents or schools?
Well, Shirley, do you want to come in here? But one of the things I would say that a lot of it will depend as well on whether 3 and 4 changes from a may to a must, and have the subsequent clause 15 amended too. But Shirley, do you want to?
Yeah, and I think fundamentally it is always looking at the bill. What goes into the bill determines what must go into the guidelines. Everything that's in the guidelines schools must adhere to. So the more prescription that's in the bill, the more we need to look and think, well, how workable is that for school? What is the impact on the ground? And will it ultimately make that difference for parents? Will it address affordability? I mean, in terms of the commencement order approach and the enabling provisions around clauses 3 and 4, would be quite concerned about these because, if there are any unintended consequences arising. So we don't know what those might be. We will never predict them all. But for example, schools may decide to work to the upper limit of a cost cap. Or if the number of branded items are limited, those could be the most expensive branded items. There's a number of real world situations that we are seeing in real time and have done over the last number of years in terms of things that impact on costs for manufacturers, suppliers, and retailers. If the bill requires us, if it's a must that we have to have a cap in place, whether that's either branded items or cost cap or both, but especially the cost cap, how do we move quickly to address these consequences? In reality, we may not be able to. So if the bill specifies a cap, either branded items or cost, then we won't be able to move quickly. We haven't got evidence to draw on yet. We don't know we know the approach that England's taken in terms of the legislation, but that's still in the House of Lords. So we don't know. We've no evidence in terms of how that works for schools and parents. If the bill makes it a must do for branded items or a cost cap, we're going to probably need a little time to calculate what those should be. If those have to come in the day after royal assent, it's not going to be precise, unless it's not going to serve anybody well for any of these things not to be precisely thought through. And that's why we've always proposed that there will be a further consultation on the cap provisions. All those potential complexities. I know the Competition and Markets Authority presented, and they have given us evidence through the consultation process as well. But we're getting right into the economics and detail, which is beyond a policy official's expertise. So the benefit of being flexible is that things can change as it needs to. It allows the purpose of the bill in terms of workable for schools, but fundamentally affordability for parents. It allows flexibility, which we really think is absolutely necessary. We may, if we have caps in place, those need to be changed. We can, Competitions and Market Authority have said you could take an approach of let the guidelines work for a couple of years and then see if the cap's needed and bring it in as necessary. You could take a different approach where we bring in a transitional cap, review that, lift it if we need to, amend it if we need to. We have the power to put it back if it needs to be done in future. But the biggest risk is if we have clauses 3 and 4 that we must put in place on royal assent, because we really need to do work on a consultation. We really genuinely need to get this right. We can't presuppose what the outcome of the consultation on the cap would be. Because we won't really know how any of these caps might work until they're implemented. So if we have flexibility to adapt them and remove or replace them or bring them back in, then that's going to be really the very best opportunity to actually make a difference here. Otherwise, we are going to be looking at legislation. This is primary legislation where, our primary piece of legislation currently is the 1986 order. We're nearly 40 years on from that. So you're talking about primary legislation being in place for a long time. Any impact or any unintended consequence that's driven by this being on the face of the bill will take further primary legislation to fix it. And while that is going through due process, whatever the issue is will remain. We will not have any power to adapt and fix that. There's just so many risks and so many unknowns in that it would be very concerning, I think.
Okay, I have just one more very quick question then. So it was quite complicated, quite complex evidence you just gave there, but I think I got through it all. Essentially what you're saying is that if Clause 15, the commencement order, and enabling 3 and 4 were done away with in terms of them being musts rather than may, whilst the intent of the bill, or the purpose that I asked Margaret Rose about, was actually to deliver more affordable uniforms, if this is poorly drafted and gets into legislation, it could actually disadvantage the very parents that we are trying to help in terms of the key purpose of the bill?
Yes. And I mean, as I say, the biggest risk is that until we implement these, we won't have thought of with the best intentions, we won't be able to think of every potential impact. We cannot predict, the other things on the other side of the world that drive up costs. There's a biggest risk is to parents, but there is a risk to retailers and suppliers as well. And the more prescription in the bill, the bigger the risk.
Thanks, Chair.
I just want to follow up on that specific
just
point,
very
if that's
briefly,
okay.
yeah.
And this is genuinely to understand this, because you've raised a concern that if we limit the number of branded items, that people might make those really expensive. But you've also told us many times that other parts of the bill will guard against excessive costs. So would these other provisions of the bill not negate that?
It depends on the level of prescription.
Yeah.
So, where it's enabling, where we may address it, then that gives us flexibility. And if, I know there was an amendment being looked at that would have it might place a limit of 3 branded items in the context of the wording around Clause 9 specific styles. So if you look at the outworkings of that, if you take, any one of those pieces of, that wording in Clause 9, which is carefully framed, so if it's a particular make or brand, or if it's a unique combination or color or fabric, even if you take colors, if that amendment was coming through, you've got 3. So you've got, do schools specify black shoes, a particular color blazer, a jumper or tie? That's at the 3 limit. So it's how workable is that for schools, and it really is dependent on which amendment you're thinking about in terms of placing on the face of the bill.
But again, I'm maybe being stupid, but the point is that you've said though there's provision in here around excessive costs. So if they did that, that would kick in then, that you can't do that, because if you make the blazer like £200, that's excessive, and you can't do that.
Exactly.
Yeah, based on what you've told us about how the bill works.
Yes.
I just in terms of the specific clause, I think Clause 2.3, which talks about what's reasonable or unreasonable, but if the guidelines are really clear about what is reasonable in terms of all the different things that schools should or shouldn't be asking, if your guidelines are watertight on that, then does that not negate the risk of schools doing some other thing to hike costs up?
There is that aspect, but it again, it really is, these clauses are written for the bill is introduced with those being enabling provisions. It's balancing what any amendment is trying to achieve and the risk associated with unintended consequences. So yes, currently we can state what is reasonable or unreasonable, but that we wouldn't have seen that as being, that a blazer cannot cost more than. So if that's what the committee is thinking is needed in the guidelines, that's probably another
haven't been that prescriptive
conversation.
We haven't been that prescriptive in any of the amendments. We haven't done that. We just have a limit on the number.
She doesn't know
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
But there's nothing then that I can see there. It would need to play out, and then under Clause 8, we would be having to react to a situation. So it's balancing what needs to be on the face of the legislation and what's in the guidelines. We can adapt the guidelines quickly. We cannot change anything that's on the face of the primary legislation without further primary legislation.
Close it off. We understand that point, and I think it's been made and well made a number of times. But again, going back to your central point, is this is about affordability. So for us, I think a lot of us feel there's a weakness within the bill as it is in terms of guaranteeing that we can bring costs down. And we look, maybe the guidelines will come forward and we'll have comfort around that. But again, as we are right now, we just don't feel that comfort.
So Kathy had indicated, I'll take this as the last indication. I've not got anybody else coming in, so we'll close the session off.
To be honest, it was exactly what Michelle was saying there. I was completely confused because I thought that what was in there was to ensure that these uniforms would be affordable no matter what, whether that limit in the branded items was in there or not. So I was quite confused as to how, if we put that in about the limit on the branded items, how that would make that any different. But that's, you've sort of answered that to Michelle. The other thing I wanted just to clarify, and it was what Michelle had initially asked upon, was around the definition of branded items, because I'm still not quite clear following the answer to Michelle, and especially if you're saying that the guidelines that you're going through with schools at the minute being interpreted in different ways. Are you saying, and I would pick up from what you were saying to Michelle, are you saying that we now need to actually define within the legislation what a branded item is?
Well, that wasn't our intention. I mean, we were intending that the guidelines would set out very clearly what we mean by a branded item, and that's what we would consider to be reasonable or unreasonable in terms of branded items, as we set out in in the what's in paragraph 210 of the public consultation document. So that was our proposals at that point, and that that's still what we would envisage in the guidelines. But I mean, that wasn't our intention to have the formal definition within the bill.
But you're content that the formal definition will be within the guidelines?
Oh, I think we will have to be very clear with schools what we mean by branded items.
But whenever you're talking to schools at the minute, is there a difference of opinion on what or how that's interpreted as to what those branded items are?
It's the interpretation of that. I mean, what happens if if you, for example, say 3 branded items, and a school can get now. If the 3 branded items may well be 3 items with a school crest on it. So if they can get a supplier to provide, and bearing in mind that us is all about competition and driving down the cost, but if a supplier can provide 4 or 5 branded items for a similar cost, or just very small difference in cost, is that going to be prohibited? Is that what we want to do?
But how are we defining what the cost is going to be? It has to be within.
But we're not defining what the cost is going to be.
Exactly. So that would be the flaw in it then.
But schools need to look at where their uniforms are at the moment, and what their ask is every year from parents, and then looking then at their uniform policies, and looking at what's in the bill so far in terms of what they should and should not do, and then what will be in the guidelines. It's taking all of that together. Then they have to work through those and set out very clearly in their published policy how they have reduced the costs of their uniform, if indeed they have had to reduce the costs, because bear in mind there are still some schools who are making, who have uniform policies that are extremely cost effective. We heard, I think, the last time around from a school in down around Craigavon. So there are schools who are actually doing these things at the moment, and it's not all schools that, and we always knew it wasn't all schools that weren't following the non-statutory guidance. There's many schools who have been, and they're very alert to the needs of parents and the needs of pupils within the schools as well. So, sorry, I've probably gone on a bit.
That's okay, thanks, Margaret Rose. So I think Danny just wanted to make a small point, and then that'll finish us off.
Yeah, just make a small point around that, because you mentioned Craigavon, and that's a very good example. But I had the privilege of going around schools this year. For my wee lad's going in the first year, and went around a number, and you get the school presents to you what the school uniform would be and what they set out, and the vast majority of them is, there's a blazer, a jumper, a tie, a coat, PE top, bottoms, zip top. The more you count on to it, it's about 10 branded items with a school crest. Now, we heard evidence that in England, the average price for post-primary uniform is £92. So going by the schools that I went and visited, that's not even close to that. It's going to cost me this year probably a couple of £100. And that's the problem. So yeah, that's what we're trying to set here, because the way the bill, in my opinion, is drafted, it's not doing enough for affordability. It really isn't. And for me, the bill is much more than that, because it says it in the face of it. It's affordability, it's comfort, and it's sustainability. Yeah. That's not coming across when you're trying to explain these guidelines. I'm just saying it's about as clear as mud, if I'm being honest with you.
Okay. Well, the bill, we have tried to address what we can in the bill, but allowing the flexibility to be more, to be clearer in the guidelines, and change the guidelines if need be. but I do understand. I mean, and we did a few, very, I suppose, as part of the research, we've gone through a number of different retailers and suppliers as to what a uniform what you could get a uniform for. And I mean, it is very obvious you can get a uniform for 120, 130 pounds, and that includes a blazer, and it includes sturdy shoes. So, it's not unreasonable to expect schools to be able to reduce their costs quite significantly. Those that are already at high, high value or the high costs.
Thank you, Margaret Rose. Well, I think we'll draw that to a conclusion there, and we'll be can hopefully bring in the committee stage to a conclusion next week, and then we'll. You guys will have time to reflect on where we land next week over the summer. But thank you both for your time.
Thank you.
Okay,
thank you. Thank you.
So, members, item 9 in the agenda was to be the clause by clause consideration of the bill, but as we're aware, that's been agreed that will now be rescheduled for Tuesday, the 1st of July. Item 10 then is correspondence, so I'd refer members to pages 114 to 195 of your packs and pages 3 to 8 of table papers, where there's some additional items of correspondence. There's a summary note at page 114 of your packs, so as usual I'll just go through anything that requires committee decision or discussion. Item 10.3 on page 118 is further correspondence from the Think 1265 campaign on teacher workload. Are members content that we write to that group and indicate that a meeting will be arranged as soon as possible after recess, if we're agreed? Mm-hmm. Item 10.4, page 119, 10.5, page 122, and 10.15 on page 178. It's correspondence separately from NIPSO, the Presbyterian Church in Ireland, and an individual regarding school uniforms bill, and we also had reference to CMA and Rainbow project correspondence that was tabled yesterday. Just really for members to confirm their content that correspondence can be disposed of by being added as submissions on the bill. Are we agreed? Agreed. Item 10.6, page 125, correspondence from the Minister of Education providing the Careers Action Plan 2025 to 2028. So there are two aspects of this. I would want to suggest, very welcome to see this arriving, and I would want to suggest that we do seek a briefing on the Careers Action Plan as a clear action arising from that, if we're agreed. Agreed. And then I think it may be that there's no particular time sensitivity to this, as the motion isn't going to be on the order paper before recess, but committee may want to revisit the wording of the draft concurrent committee motion in the light of this, as I think it does reference the lack of provision of the Careers Action Plan, so that may be something that we want to pick up, and I don't know even if between now and next meeting, if the clerk, through you and your team, you could recirculate the wording of that motion just for members to have an opportunity to consider that, if we're agreed. Okay, item 10.7, it's a response from the Minister of the Economy regarding engagement with Young Enterprise. Are members content to note the response and share it with Young Enterprise and to invite feedback from them? Members are agreed. Item 10.8, page 161, it's a response from the Department of Education, provides a breakdown of the special educational needs projects which have had funding assigned and the current progress of each project. I would be content to note, but happy to hear members' views if they have anything they want to add to that. No? Agreed to note. Item 10.9 to 10.14, pages 163 to 177, and then items 10.2 to 10.22 on pages 4 to 6 of table papers. It's letters campaigning in regard to post-19 provision for young people with special educational needs. I would suggest that following the event from Send Reform NI, Caleb's cause this week, and the statement previous to that from the Economy Minister, I would suggest that this is an appropriate time for the committee to write to the Education Minister on this particular issue. I would like to hear from the Education Minister how he plans to engage with his counterparts, particularly in economy and health, in terms of taking these issues forward and delivering the necessary reform and legislation for all young people leaving schools with SEN. And I think there's a key aspect to that which comes through in all my engagement with parents in this space, is around the transitions planning in schools really not being fit for purpose at the moment. And we've heard clear evidence at committee that when a transitions plan even is delivered, that no one department actually owns it. So I would be keen to write to the Education Minister to seek clear response from him how he will now engage with his counterparts going forward. If we're agreed? Great. Item 10.16, page 179. It's an assessment of the Boots and Books intervention, provides a joined up approach to literacy, health and wellbeing. So thanks to Peter for sharing that. It looks like a great project. Are members content to schedule a presentation from this group who delivered the project? It may be an informal briefing in the first instance, but I mean, Peter, if you want to speak to it, I know it's local to your constituency.
More than happy to, Chair. Yeah, this came in from Ian McManus in Malal Primary School. Essentially, Books and Boots is a program that encourages young boys and girls to hit their AR targets, and if they hit them, I believe they get a training session with the Linfield captain, and it has, as you would note, had really, really significant results in terms of kids just really enjoying reading and hitting targets. So I just thought it'd be something that the committee would be interested in, actually having Ian in and hearing about the programme. So
yeah, absolutely, looks like a great project. Happy to take views from members, whether that's an informal or formal briefing. Conscious we're coming to forward work planning, and there is, that had been highlighted in the last session, perhaps be an appetite around an inquiry into SENS, which is conscious of how the work plan can get squeezed. Do members have a view on that? Peter, are you proposing a formal briefing? Is that what you had hoped to hear from?
I think we should get him in and let him talk about the programme, yeah.
Okay.
Obviously, after recess,
of course,
sometime.
That's
I think we squeeze him in. I think maybe a third committee meeting next week would be appropriate.
It would be a committee meeting of one, I think, if we're squeezing it in before recess. So our members agreed. We'll seek any objection to seeking a formal briefing from this group. No, members are agreed. Okay, item 10.17, page 181 is a response from the EA regarding the school patrol crossing at St Francis Primary, Lurgan. Are members content to note but to share the issue with the correspondent and for them to come back with any feedback? Agreed. Item 10.18, page 195, it's correspondence from an individual regarding the school inspections and the consultation that's out from the department at the moment. I would propose to note it is out subject to consultation unless members have any other views.
Yeah, I sent this in. Sorry, I'm just trying to find exactly where we are and what the how it was going to be disposed of. Give me 1 second. Yeah, it was done. It was done as reflecting Q&A with ENA and Ford. ETI was what was done just in.
Well, in the note, apologies if I've missed that. So let me just refer to the.
Is it 10.18?
10.18.
Yep.
Yes. Apologies if I've missed that direction.
No, you're okay, Chair.
So if the recommendation in the correspondence in it reflect in the Q&A with the EA, now it didn't come up in the Q&A. No. I mean, are members content that we forward that to the ETI for a response? Is that?
I'd say forward to the ETI and send it on to the minister. Yeah.
Members are agreed. Agreed. Okay, then we also have in tabled papers Phoenix Education have written to the committee seeking to brief the committee and really around a whole range of issues broadly in the spectrum of tackling educational disadvantage. Know that they're a setting that do great work. I'd be really keen to hear from them. I'm just happy to seek members' views if they're agreed that that's an evidence session we'd want to take forward. Agreed. Okay. Other than that, are members content to dispose of the correspondence as per the summary note at page 114? Is that agreed? Agreed. Okay. Forward work programme. Page 200 of your packs. On the one hand, this should be straightforward. It hasn't changed, I don't think, from last week. So that would be hopefully a straightforward endorsement. We are very nearly at recess. If members are content to endorse that, just as drafted. The only other aspect on that is really around the proposal that we had from Danny earlier around an inquiry into SEN. I am minded to add my support to that in terms of just it really does seem to be an issue that we are now really seeing just come around on a recurring issue. I think the placements issue we discussed today is a symptom of a systemic failing to address this issue properly over many years. We do have a transformation agenda through from the department, but I think it is appropriate for the committee to take a really deep dive into this, to have a look in a lot more detail around the nuts and bolts of that transformation plan, the relevant services it engages at EA, to hear from evidence at school level and at parental level, and indeed the community and voluntary sector who feed into this area as well. I am conscious that when we undertook the RSE inquiry, it became very clear that on any subject you choose to do an inquiry, there is potentially an unlimited scope to hear evidence. So I would want to suggest that we look at an evidence session a week between September and Christmas. And I think I would be open to members reaching a view at that stage in terms of any committee report. We've had any number of reports with recommendations. I'm not sure we really need new recommendations, but I think to show that commitment to hearing the evidence may well result in a short report with some very short recommendations. I don't think anyone needs to reinvent the wheel, but I feel that in the first instance there's a need to hear that evidence to really see if we can start to join the dots in the system as to where where these failings are, why they're manifesting as they are, and what the department's capacity currently is to address that through its transformation plan. Our members agreed on that approach. I would hope an evidence session a week wouldn't preclude us from carrying out other work. Was in my mind to suggest that we look with a very specific say and focus regardless. And I think based on what we've heard today, my sense is we'd be failing in our duty if we don't at least commit to prioritising SEN for as our area for evidence taking post recess. But happy to hear from other members.
Can I just suggest something? The Public Accounts report on the impact review of special educational needs was 2021, and I understand that is no longer subject to primacy by PAC, so it's open to the committee to use those recommendations as an initial structure. So you would go back to the DE and EA in the first instance and say, what have you done with these recommendations? It'll give you a kind of a starting point, and have some continuity as well with previous work that's been done, and then that would help you to look into the adequacy of the current SEN delivery proposals.
That seems like a sensible starting point. I'm all conscious that we're, given how long ago that report even was, things will have moved on substantially since then. Whether they've moved on positively or not is another question. Peter, you'd wanted to come in.
Sure. Thanks, Chair. We have talked about SEN a lot on committee, and it's something that is deeply sensitive to a lot of people in Northern Ireland, and clearly massive in terms of an agenda item within education in terms of Northern Ireland. So I would certainly support the inquiry if that's what members want to do. No issue whatsoever. I suppose it's a process point. This afternoon we decided to have an inquiry. That's the first that I kind of heard about it.
It was proposed during the meeting.
I know that. I suppose it's a wee bit about, if you want to propose an inquiry to the committee. It's not a criticism of Danny. I actually happen to support this, and it's something I'm very passionate about myself. But it's about the process of how we do that. Suddenly the committee will be having an inquiry on SEN, which is the most worthwhile and valuable topic perhaps we could do, but it's about the committee just thinking this afternoon we'll do this, and I haven't been cited on it. I haven't been made aware of it. I certainly didn't know it was coming up, and I know, Danny, I know you did.
I'll be honest with you, Peter, it was because of that last bit on the hoof. We are talking about children, right, who are going to be more likely, and I don't want to scare parents, but they could end up only being given a morning. See, last year, and because they do then put it back onto the schools, this is the other problem, and then parents are stuck in the middle. They don't want to fight with the schools or give them a bad name. But see, at stay and play last year, I did have a case where a child only got 30 minutes between September and December of stay and play. I couldn't go public with it because they didn't want to go to school, but they know it fine rightly. And see, when they're saying that they're not preparing, there is adequate places, I don't want to name the places either, but they're not adequate places, and that's the other problem here. So we need to get a nuts and bolts, and that's why it was more passion to say we need to deal with this.
And I get that, Danny, and I have no issue. And on that case, that is wholly unacceptable. And if it was my case, I'd be fighting the same way as you would in terms of getting provision for that child. No issue with that whatsoever, and I have no issue with us having an inquiry and saying I fully support that. I just wanted to raise a point, and I accept that Danny brought it up, and I don't feel hamstrung in this in any way. It was passion and passion in that session that led us to where we are. It's just to say, for example, I'd like to see some terms of reference for this, and I'm sure they're going to be created.
Nobody has them because this has arisen
today
in our discussions.
But in terms of agreeing to, I think it's a really, really important area, I think we want to give it to the due care and attention that it really, really deserves. As part of that process, I'd really want to. One of the important things for me is looking at why there is this explosion that is effectively doubling every 4 or 5 years. You know, I mean, that's and no one has come up with any really definitive research. Certainly, no comparative research across the jurisdictions in the British Isles or in mainland Europe to look at why this is. I think that would be really important to have in. More than happy to support it. I made my point around how we got to there, Chair, but I think some of those things would be really, really crucial to look at.
Just in terms of the organisation of it, I mean, the committee did want to do strategic planning, like pre or it's now looking like post recess, so we can put together a pack of all of the material that the committee's already heard about special educational needs and a provisional for terms of reference for members to consider and agree. I've also just asked just to see what's coming the department about legislation that's on its way. So the school leaving age bill could be here as early as December 2025. Also one about the General Teaching Council and maybe a school inspections bill. So, you know, you're still going to have those parameters of other things coming out of left field just to manage expectations. We will try to put a structure on it and bring papers to strategic planning after summer. Sorry, other people wanted to come in. I just wanted to make that point.
If I could just respond, to be very clear, I as unsighted as you are, Peter.
I know
but
that, Chair.
But I would caveat that with it's not the first time an inquiry into saying has been floated.
Nope, I agree.
And I think floated by yourself during the RSE inquiry.
I agree.
Would be better spent.
Nicely done, Chair.
Yeah. So
it is one of the committee's priorities.
And it's a committee priority.
One of the committee's strategic priorities. So I would struggle to see any robust argument other than the capacity of the clerk and the team to actually support the process, just because, you know, I think already stretched, you know, to pretty close to the limits. So I would be of a mind to look at this between September and December and to try and not extend it beyond that, purely because legislation is almost certainly going to come after that point, and we've seen what that process can look like. So, okay, well, look, that is all for picking up after recess. I'll certainly engage through the clerk over the summer on some of the finer points on that. But I would just encourage members, when we come to set in terms of reference, to please let's feed into what we really want to see in this, because when we did open up our RSE inquiry, members were very relaxed about the terms of reference in terms of how broad it could be, and I think we maybe just saw the outworkings of that.
Look, I was there, Chair.
No, you weren't. You weren't.
Okay.
But we do need to be.
Please feel like David Brooks, isn't that right?
I would blame it on him.
So, that takes us on then past item 11. I would add one thing. I do think we should be seeking to have the Minister in fairly soon after recess. I think it would be an appropriate time to do that, so we'll add that to the agenda.
Maybe you can bring the guidelines with them.
You never know. You never know. Item 12. Any other business? Is there any other business? No. And item 13, date, time and place of next meeting. Never a committee to just have one session in the week. That will be Tuesday the 1st of July, and that's room 29 and online at 9:15 a.m, and that will be our formal clause by clause consideration of the bill.
Sorry, I might be along late to that.
It's fine, thank you, Deputy Chair.
We do need quorum for it, everything, so if people are travelling and there's a problem, we will schedule it in the afternoon.
That's okay.
Okay, so.
Okay, thank you, members. So
Thank you.
the question the committee meeting does now adjourn. We agreed?
Great.
Committee Room 29. Sound. Committee Room 29. Sound.